Welcome back to our channel. Today we will explore a new case. The case of Celeste Beard. Behind the doors of a lavish Texas mansion, where life seemed filled with happiness and wealth, a dark conspiracy led to the tragic death of Stephen Beard, a respected millionaire. A horrific event shattered the peace, revealing shocking secrets about love, betrayal, and bottomless greed. Austin is the capital of Texas, USA, and has a population of around 1 million people. A large portion of this population consists of students and employees from local colleges. Many graduates choose to stay in the area to work in high-tech industries. Similar to those found in Silicon Valley, Stephen Beard moved to Austin with his wife in 2008 after winning a contract with an independent television company. At that time, he had no idea of the remarkable success that lay ahead for him, nor the tragic events that would later unfold in his life. In 1924, in Dallas, Texas, he was close to his mother but did not know his father. After finishing high school, he pursued a career in engineering. However, during the post-war years, he faced significant challenges in finding a job. Eventually, he secured a position as a shoe salesman in Dallas, earning a modest salary of $15 a week despite the low pay. He later regarded this job as his greatest success because it was where he met his future wife, Elise, a model. They made a vibrant and harmonious couple. Elise was slender and petite, but enjoyed activities like fishing and horseback riding, which were considered more masculine. Both shared a boundless energy, making them well-suited for each other. Shortly after these events, Stephen landed his dream job at a radio station in Dallas. He worked hard to rise from a cleaner to a leading advertising agent, eventually becoming a television program producer and a highly sought-after expert in his field. While Stephen advanced in his career, Elise focused on being a housewife and raising their 3 children. Their first daughter was born when Stephen was 48. During this time, Stephen became a symbol of success, engaging in real estate, advertising, and car sales, which allowed him to earn money quickly. He made his first million. But his greatest achievement came when he established his own television company. The couple relocated to Austin and quickly purchased a mansion that offered breathtaking views of the city. He selected one of the priciest neighborhoods, providing them with a significant degree of privacy that occasionally felt excessive. They embraced a luxurious family life in their nearly 5-square-meter home. The couple also became members of a country club, which had a membership fee of $50 even back then. By this time, Stephen and Elise had no financial concerns, and that amount was merely a small expense for them. At this time, Stephen gained significant weight. He humorously related his weight gain to his lifestyle and financial situation. He enjoyed indulging in food and drinks while living a mostly inactive life, while his wife remained focused on maintaining her health and fitness. Beginning in 1986, Stephen's media business started to thrive. However, the family faced a tragic event when, in 1993, Elise was diagnosed with a malignant brain tumor. This news devastated them all throughout her chemotherapy and radiation treatment. Stephen remained by Elise's side, providing her with unwavering support. In the summer of that year, she went into remission, and they took a cruise to celebrate their 45th anniversary. But not long after, she passed away. Family meant everything to Stephen, and he had been without Elise for a long time. Each day, he visited the Austin Country Club alone, drank several strong drinks, had dinner, and then returned to his mansion. Even though there were maids and nannies in the house to help with chores and look after the children, he felt overwhelmed and lonely. His relatives thought he needed a new wife or someone to help organize his life. Soon, Stephen met Celeste, a 30-year-old waitress at the country club. Attracted to her, he invited her to work as a housekeeper, and she happily accepted the offer. Celeste was born on February 13, 1963, in Los Angeles, Her mother abandoned her shortly after birth, and she was quickly adopted by Edwin and Nancy Johnson. The couple had struggled with infertility and faced multiple miscarriages, so they decided to adopt a child from an orphanage to experience the joys of parenthood. During that time, in the USA, adoption was relatively straightforward. Over 4 years, they adopted 4 children, and Celeste was the second. She just 2 days old when they brought her home. Unfortunately, even after finding a family, her trials did not end. She said how her mother experienced depression and a nervous breakdown. One of her most terrifying memories was when her mother held the children's heads underwater in the bathtub, while Celeste stood by. Completely confused, Nancy claimed this was a way to rinse them off after washing, but Celeste perceived it very differently as the situation worsened. Her adoptive mother was hospitalized due to a nervous breakdown caused by diet pills and exhaustion. Overall, their relationship was poor. Celeste was initially very close to her father. However, she later accused him of molestation, claiming it happened when she was 11. However, Edwin maintained that these accusations were false. In high school, Celeste's adoptive parents separated, which caused her to become more distant and harsh towards those she cared about. Her mother and father fought for custody, with Edwin facing allegations of domestic violence and sexual harassment. Nancy was seen as a potential threat due to her mental health struggles during the custody trial. Celeste testified against her father, even alleging that he had once hit her in the face with a knife. Although she claimed the scar had faded over time, many found her story hard to believe. As her behavior at the time was erratic and aggressive, Celeste was referred to a psychiatrist, but the doctor could not determine the root of her issues. Ultimately, they concluded that she was simply going through a challenging phase typical of adolescence, influenced by hormonal changes throughout her life. She moved between different foster families. Despite facing challenges with her behavior, she was popular with boys, and she excelled in sports. Everyone recognized her as a lively teenager. Once she got her driver's license, she began speeding through her neighborhood recklessly. Her troubles continued, and at 15, she met a 17-year-old named Craig Bratcher at a bar. Shortly after their relationship began, she started skipping school and using drugs. Most of her time was spent hanging out with him at the beach. They eventually moved in together, and by 17, she became pregnant with twins. During this time, her tendency to lie became apparent. She told people that these children had been eagerly anticipated, but later expressed that her boyfriend was opposed to the pregnancy. She claimed to doctors that he had once struck her in the stomach, but later retracted that statement. Despite these inconsistencies, Celeste became engaged to her boyfriend on December 6, 1980, although doctors advised her to rest in bed because of the risk of losing the pregnancy. She persisted in living a carefree lifestyle. In 2008, she gave birth to twins, Jennifer and Christina. Several months prematurely, the babies spent approximately 3 months in the hospital on life support. After returning home, the couple's relationship turned increasingly hostile. They maintained their reckless lifestyle, which led to more frequent arguments that escalated into fights. Celeste often found herself in conflict due to her fiery temper. At times, she harmed herself and then blamed Craig for domestic violence. Trying to rationalize her actions, she frequently referenced her past trauma, claiming she had been sexually abused as a child. However, her story changed over time. She began to allege that not just her father, but also her older brother had molested her. Many people were skeptical of Celeste's claims. Viewing her as a habitual liar, she reported Craig to the police for domestic violence after her husband found her in bed with a neighbor. In response, Craig threatened the couple with a weapon, which resulted in Craig serving 4 months in prison. Though no one was injured during the incident, Celeste secured a restraining order against Craig, and they divorced in May 1982 when their twins were just over a year old. Despite the accusations and the restraining order, Celeste frequently left the children with their biological father to attend various parties after the divorce. Celeste faced housing issues and moved in with a friend along with her children. However, she soon became frustrated with a neighbor she thinks who constantly bothered her children, which led to her being asked to leave during this time. Celeste's behavior became increasingly erratic. She frequently fabricated stories and even called the police for trivial reasons. For instance, she reported her wallet stolen, only to later discover it at home. It appeared that she was not very attentive to her children. As she spent most of her free time socializing with friends, she often left her children with acquaintances for several days, which ultimately resulted in her daughters being placed in foster care. Friends and family often excused her actions by attributing them to her youth and inexperience with motherhood. They said that Celeste received little support from her relatives and had a strained relationship with her mother, which ultimately contributed to her decision to abandon her children. After some time, she got back together with Craig. They moved in together and tried to live as a normal family, but her behavior did not improve. In 1985, she accused Craig of rape. This time, he was not accept the blame for her fabrications because he was facing a serious sentence. The situation hinged on a false statement made by one of the two children. From that point on, the trust of all her relatives and friends in Celeste was completely shattered. No one believed her anymore. Eventually, all her claims were questioned, including the rape allegations. As her father and brothers failed to confirm them, it seems she had planned to manipulate the situation from the beginning. In the following years, Celeste married twice and then divorced again. Her behavior did not change. She remained aggressive and deceitful during this time. She was diagnosed with a depressive disorder despite undergoing treatment and taking medication. She saw little improvement and often experienced emotional breakdowns after ending relationships. Eventually, Celeste met a wealthy man named Jimmy Martinez. By this point, her children were already 11 years old. She fought with her ex-husband Craig for custody, as he believed she was an unfit mother and that the children were at risk. Craig won the custody battle, but Celeste tries to appear saddened by the loss of one of her daughters, Christina, with whom she had a closer bond. Although Craig tried to regain custody, Celeste resisted, and the twins returned to their chaotic lifestyle. However, this situation did not last long. As Celeste was summoned to Arizona on fraud charges, authorities discovered that Celeste had attempted to rob a couple who had briefly adopted her child. She tried to use her usual tactics to deflect blame, but she failed this time. Additionally, she had set her car on fire in the desert to collect insurance money. The victims discovered this and helped bring her to justice. Ultimately, her fraud was exposed. Fortunately for Celeste, she received a sympathetic judge who sentenced her to probation and a $20 fine. In exchange, she agreed to move to Texas and never returned to Arizona. Celeste moved in with Jimmy, and soon after, they got married. She took his last name. But Jimmy soon realized that she was accumulating a significant amount of debt, totaling tens of thousands of dollars. It was confusing for him because she was now his legal wife, and he didn't understand why this was happening. When he tried to clarify to the creditors that these debts were not his, he was met with accusations of sexual assault of Celeste. Additionally, Celeste stabbed herself in the wrist with scissors, seemingly trying to make it seem like she wanted to end her life in order to trap Jimmy in the process. In the next stage, Celeste found a job at the Austin Country Club in the fall of 1990. She met a wealthy man named Stephen Beard and began working as a housekeeper in his home. This was surprising, as Celeste had no experience with household tasks. She didn't know how to cook, clean, or do laundry. However, she aimed to attach herself to a wealthy man to manage her lack of skills. She secretly relied on other maids to do the work without Stephen's knowledge. With her attractive appearance and feigned abilities, it didn't take long for Stephen to be drawn to her. After the loss of his beloved wife, Celeste quickly integrated into the millionaire's social circle and even joked with his friends about her role as a housekeeper despite her lack of skills, while everyone laughed politely. They were well aware that Celeste was not truly suitable for Stephen. Celeste was openly disinterested in Stephen, telling her daughter Christina that the only reason she liked him was because he was wealthy. Despite this, she continued to fabricate stories about herself, claiming to be a certified accounting specialist. By this time, many people suspected that she had serious issues. Craig even tried to warn Stephen about her true nature. One day, when he received a call from Craig, he wanted to discuss their children. Craig took the opportunity to caution Stephen that Celeste was a very dangerous woman. However, Stephen was unwavering in his feelings. He saw Celeste as a source of light during a tough time in his life and was grateful for the happiness she brought him. Celeste significantly improved Stephen's life. When his doctor informed him that he had an enlarged heart and was at high risk for a heart attack, she encouraged him to adopt a healthier diet and insisted on walking with him everywhere to increase his physical activity. Thanks to her support, he lost over 20 kg. This weight loss brought new vitality to him. He found it easier to move, and the chest pain he had suffered since his wife's death vanished. He also began spending more time with his children. Eventually, they got engaged. This development raised concerns among his friends, including a judge who suggested that Stephen should consider a marriage contract. Suspecting Celeste's intentions, the couple came to an agreement regarding their finances. At that time, Stephen's fortune was valued at $12 million if they separated. Stephen would keep all his real estate if Celeste stayed married to him for 3 years. She would receive $500 in case she remained with him until his death. She would get $1 million. Additionally, he gave her $500 as a wedding gift under these conditions. On February 18, 1995, Celeste married Stephen Beard, her fourth husband, in a ceremony at the Austin Country Club, where she had recently worked as a waitress. The event was not well received by everyone. Ira, one of Stephen and Christina's children, attended the wedding. The others chose not to attend. Believing the marriage was a disingenuous arrangement, Celeste and Stephen spent their honeymoon in New Orleans. In March 1995, when they returned, Christina moved in with them. Christina often witnessed her mother crushing pills and mixing them into her husband's food. Celeste claimed these were sleeping pills, allowing her to leave her husband at home and go out for fun. Many people knew she frequented clubs at night while her husband slept, but they kept it from Stephen to avoid upsetting him. However, he soon sensed something was off. Despite giving Celeste a limited budget, he quickly noticed that she had spent over $100 within just a month of their marriage. He was particularly alarmed by the disappearance of jewelry from the safe. A friend at the bank informed him that Celeste had actually stolen the jewelry belonging to his late wife, Elise. This revelation enraged him, leading him to decide to kick Celeste out of the house. In a state of despair, she started to defend her actions, stating that she owed $20 in Arizona and had taken the jewelry to settle the debt. Celeste assured him that she would return everything once her financial issues were resolved. At this time, Stephen found himself repeating the mistakes of previous men. He was deceived and manipulated, although out of protection for her. He ended up covering her insurance fraud and withdrew his divorce. Celeste was admitted to a psychiatric clinic, where she was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder and given medication that she was required to take. However, she continued to lie. Celeste realized that she was dealing with a smart and experienced man, not a naive one. This meant she needed to be more careful and strategic than Stephen was used to. Her first goal is to convince her husband to buy the property, which would allow her to claim half. In the event of divorce, Celeste emphasized that she couldn't feel comfortable in a house purchased while Elise was still alive. Ultimately, Stephen agreed and sold the house. They moved to the lake house, which they planned to renovate with the help of a renowned architect. Stephen was involved in the project almost daily. Celeste kept pressuring her husband for more assets. At the start of 1996, Stephen met with his lawyer to revise their marriage contract. The new agreement stated that if he died, Celeste would get not only $1 million, but also half of their new mansion, while he supervised the construction. Celeste spent her time shopping and hardly visited the site, knowing she would receive a substantial payout upon her husband's death. She aimed to expedite that outcome. They had a daily routine of drinking together. He enjoyed high-quality alcohol, but she secretly replaced it with a cheaper, questionable drink. She even mixed in drugs, playfully referring to her concoction as a cemetery cocktail among her friends. Celeste was now waiting for her plan to unfold. In the meantime, her first husband was self-harm, and her second daughter moved in with her at around 3 a.m. on October 2, 1999. Stephen called 911. The 75-year-old man was clearly panicked and confused. He told the dispatcher that he did not want to die. From his words, the dispatcher realized that he had a serious injury. Stephen said he was holding his internal organs in place to prevent them from falling out. He was unable to explain how he got hurt. He had woken up in severe pain and urgently needed help. After reaching out to the dispatch service, he informed them that his wife, Celeste, was in a different part of the mansion. He requested that they ask her to come to him. However, when the dispatcher tried to contact her, there was no response. When the police arrived, no one answered the door. They circled the house and discovered a small patio behind glass doors. Inside, a man was sitting. He was holding a phone in one hand and gripping the door with the other. Right away, one of the officers smashed the glass door to enter the bedroom. Although Stephen was in very bad shape, he was still alive. It appeared that his stomach had been severely injured. Stephen denied having had a recent surgery and that the stitches could have come undone, but he could not explain what had actually happened. The police quickly called a rescue helicopter to take him to the hospital. As the police moved through the mansion to open the front door for the ambulance crew, they encountered Celeste. She explained that she woke up to the flashing lights of police cars. She had called the emergency services, but they informed her that Stephen had already reached out for help. Both Celeste and her daughters confirmed that Stephen had not undergone any recent surgeries, so his injuries could not be attributed to stitches that had ripped. One of the arriving officers attempted to reassure the family. He informed them of the emergency, and Celeste pleaded for her husband's life while their daughters tried to comfort her. The girls then entered the bedroom where Stephen lay. Although they were not allowed to see him, they could hear their mother crying, and no one saw her tears. Meanwhile, in the next room, Stephen was fighting for his life. His injuries were serious. The paramedics began bandaging on the way to the ambulance, trying to hold the huge wound. One officer noticed a shell casing worker on the bedroom floor, leading to the declaration of the room as a crime scene. Investigators and forensic experts were called immediately, and all outsiders were removed from the bedroom to begin the investigation. Celeste was suspected of attacking Stephen. She denied any involvement in the incident, claiming that she was sleeping in another part of the house when he was shot in the stomach. Law enforcement confirmed her alibi with the help of her daughters. New details soon came to light. While receiving treatment for depression in a psychiatric hospital, Celeste met another patient named Tracy Tarleton. Very few people in Stephen's inner circle knew about Tracy. Christina mentioned that her mother had referred to Tracy casually. After their relationship ended, various rumors circulated. Some speculated that there were romantic feelings between the two women, while others believed that only Tracy had any affection for Celeste. Investigators theorize that Celeste paid Tracy to kill her husband, to bring the day when Celeste would receive her inheritance. Eventually, Tracy was arrested by the police. During her interrogation, she quickly confessed that on October 2, 1999, she entered the Stevens mansion, went to the bedroom, and shot Stephen in the stomach before fleeing the scene. However, she denied intending to kill him when police searched her home. They found a weapon, which ballistics later confirmed was the weapon used in the attack. Surprisingly, Stephen survived the attack. Despite his serious injuries, doctors managed to save his life, and he returned home to continue recovering under the care of Celeste 2 years later. He died from a blood clot that had become detached. Doctors believe this is due to injuries from the previous attack following Stephen's death. Tracy's charges were upgraded to murder, making the situation much more serious. During the investigation, Celeste continued to live her preferred lifestyle, freely spending her late husband's money. She even remarried just 6 months after his death. Her actions raised increasing doubts and suspicions, but she maintained her denial of any involvement in the crime. Initially, Tracy's did not speak about Celeste's involvement in the events surrounding the death of Stephen. However, upon learning about the wedding, Tracy felt betrayed and started to assert that Celeste played a role in the Stephen's death. Tracy accused Celeste, and she agreed to a plea bargain with the prosecution. She also agreed to testify against Celeste in exchange for a reduced prison sentence in 2002. The trial commenced during the proceedings. Tracy testified against Celeste as part of a deal. Strong evidence was presented, including a recording where Celeste admitted to offering money for the murder of Stephen. Additionally, Celeste's daughters also testified against her, claiming that their mother sought a hitman to kill Stephen and then tried to persuade Tracy to prevent Tracy from testifying in the case. The court found Celeste guilty of first-degree murder, sentencing her to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 40 years. Tracy was also convicted and received a 10-year prison sentence, followed by 12 years of probation. Tracy was released from prison in 2011 and later expressed regret for her actions, stating that she regretted the atrocities she committed every day. During an interview in 2004, Celeste maintained her innocence. She is still incarcerated and will be eligible for parole in 2042. When she turns 79, the Stephen Beard case is not just a crime story, but also a reflection on the complex relationships, greed, and betrayal in life, from a wealthy millionaire to the victim of a calculated murder plot. This case shows how blind love, hate, and power can lead to tragedy. Despite ending with harsh sentences, the trauma endured by Stephen's family and the characters involved remains a lasting reminder that sometimes dark secrets can never be hidden forever, and that every decision can change our lives forever. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Marisela Botella Valadez. Marisela Botella Valadez was born in 1997 in Seattle, Washington. As the eldest of 2 children in a Latin American family, she was known for being a kind, outgoing young woman with many friends. She excelled in school and went on to attend a prestigious university after graduating. Marisela was a stunning young woman with a petite frame, long brunette hair, and big brown eyes. She was always the center of attention and loved being around people, often attending lively parties and making the most of every day. On October 3, 2020, Marisela traveled to Dallas to visit old friends, but she planned to return by Monday morning. Her brother was supposed to pick her up from the airport on October 5, and they would head to the university together. However, when the plane arrived, Marisela was nowhere to be found. A search for the missing student began when her brother realized she wasn't among the passengers who had disembarked from the flight. He tried to call her, but her phone was turned off. He then contacted their parents to inform them of the situation. Marisela's disappearance was unusual, as she was a responsible and serious young woman who would not normally miss university classes without warning. Marisela's family reached out to her friends in Dallas to gather information about her possible whereabouts and her last known location. Their efforts led them to a popular club in the city, where she was spotted partying with friends the night before her disappearance. While there, she had met a man named Chuck and they had danced and socialized together over drinks. After that, they of them left the club, and Maricela was not seen again. When her family was unable to reach her by phone, they grew extremely concerned and frightened, prompting them to quickly report her disappearance to the police. She had purchased tickets for a flight to Seattle, but she never boarded the plane. Her whereabouts since that night were unknown. To investigate further, it was crucial to identify the new person she had met, their destination, and whether she had left with them voluntarily. Reviewing surveillance footage from outside the club, authorities observed Maricela exiting with a young man, but his face was not clearly visible on the video. According to the footage, Maricela appeared to be walking with a man voluntarily before getting into a black Audi car and driving off in an unknown direction. Several days had passed since her disappearance, and she had not contacted anyone, logged into her social media accounts, or made any transactions on her bank cards. The police urgently needed to identify the stranger she was with to determine where to search for them. One of her friends reported that the companion might be named Chuck, but this information was not enough. However, street camera footage helped investigators determine the direction the car had traveled. Further review of supermarket security footage revealed that they had stopped to shop, appearing happy and affectionate towards each other. The footage showed Maricela selecting drinks and candies, while he paid for the items using a card in the name of Charles Beltran. It became clear that Maricela had left with Beltran, a 31-year-old musician who was gaining popularity as a local rap star. However, Beltran had a troubled past, having been to prison twice for robbery and armed assault. He had been released on parole after serving less than 3 years and was on the verge of releasing his own music album. An investigation revealed that Maricela's phone had been active at a specific location on the night she went missing. The location was linked to a house owned by a woman named Lisa Dyke, who was renting a room to Beltran. When police and an FBI agent investigating Maricela's disappearance visited the house, they found it empty. The police were only able to reach Lisa Dyke by phone, as she said she was out of state for work. She confirmed that Charles Beltran had been renting a room in her home, but claimed he had moved out about 2 weeks ago. She also stated that she had no idea where he was after that. They searched the house where he used to live and made several alarming discoveries. The interior was a disaster zone with mess and unsanitary conditions everywhere. It appeared as if the residents had departed abruptly, only taking essential belongings and abandoning the rest. Dirty dishes were stacked high in the sink, old food and mold sat on the kitchen table, and garbage covered the corners of the floor. In stark contrast, investigators found multiple empty bottles of cleaning supplies scattered around, and there were also remnants on the floor and carpet indicating an attempt to scrub areas clean. A disturbing black statue of death, draped in a black cloak and grasping a scythe, occupied one of the upstairs rooms. While it could have been dismissed as an eccentric decoration, its presentation as a makeshift altar, complete with wax candles, dried flowers, and 2 metal bowls, suggested a more sinister purpose. The setup bore an uncanny resemblance to the Mexican cult of Santa Muerte, which reveres a female embodiment of death. The house exuded an atmosphere of foreboding, as if a traumatic event had occurred, prompting the occupants to hastily gather their belongings and flee in a state of panic. A more thorough investigation was conducted using specialized tools to detect blood traces. This revealed multiple wiped blood stains in one of the bedrooms, the bathroom, and the hallway. The bedroom with the most significant bloodstains belonged to Charles, suggesting a violent crime had occurred there. However, the identity of the victim remained unclear. Despite attempts to clean the area, the blood had penetrated the carpet, seeped under the baseboards, and stained the wallpaper and furniture. To confirm the source of the blood, experts compared the samples with Morella's DNA. The results eliminated any remaining doubts, confirming that the blood belonged to Morella. The police had to seal the house as a crime scene, but their next challenge was to track down the main suspect, potential accomplices, and witnesses. However, this proved to be a difficult task as Charles had already fled the scene, and the owner had quickly put the house up for sale even before the police arrived. To gather more information, the police decided to investigate the people who had recently lived in the house. According to the neighbors, who described a complicated love triangle, 3 individuals had lived in the house: 57-year-old Lisa Dyke, 48-year-old Nina Morano, and 31-year-old Charles Beltran. However, the nature of their relationships and the reason for their sudden disappearance remained unclear. To move forward with the investigation, the police needed to look into each person's background and find them as soon as possible for questioning. The owner of the house, who was the only one reachable by phone, was a well-known lawyer with a commanding and ambitious personality. She had been married 3 times and had inherited a substantial amount of money after becoming a widow several years ago. Given her financial situation, it was unclear why she had rented a room to Charles, as she was not known for her charitable nature, suggesting that she may have had an ulterior motive. Charles Beltran, also known as Chuck, had big dreams of becoming a successful rapper. However, his lack of funds and connections, combined with a troubled past, made it difficult for him to get started. That was until he met Dyke, who offered him a helping hand. She took him in, setting up a small recording studio in her home, and even funded the production of several music videos to help launch his career. Dyke also provided Chuck with a car, paid for his social expenses, and bought him stylish clothing. Despite her significant financial investment in Chuck, Dyke maintained that their relationship was purely professional, insisting that she saw great potential in the young rapper and was simply investing in his future. The situation with Nina Morano was particularly interesting. She had been in a long-term relationship with Lisa, and after Lisa's husband passed away, they women no longer hid their romance. In fact, they had gotten married just a few months prior. Nina moved in with Lisa, who was already living with a young musician named Charles. Although Lisa denied it, a close friend claimed that she had a romantic relationship with Charles, and Lisa had even confided in her friend about how great he was as a lover. It seemed that Lisa was deeply in love with Charles, as evidenced by her efforts to look younger, including losing 55 pounds, changing her image, wearing bright makeup, and getting tattoos. Lisa had also made some significant changes to her life, including evicting her adult children from the home, citing that they were interfering with her personal life. Charles, on the other hand, had a clear interest in staying with Lisa, who was wealthy and could help him financially and advance his music career. However, as a physically attractive man, Charles often engaged in casual flings with young women, which made Lisa extremely jealous. But what was Nina Morano's role in all of this, and specifically, what did she have to do with Morella's disappearance? According to a close friend, Lisa's spouse, Na, was also involved in the unusual love triangle with Lisa and he. Na was a successful lawyer and a wealthy woman. The 3 of them lived a life of luxury together. After they got married, both women took his last name, Beltran, and the 3 of them lived together in the house. But what happened to the people who lived in the house where Morella's blood was discovered? After Morella disappeared, no one was seen at home again. Lisa was contacted once and answered a few questions, claiming she was in another state, but her phone was unreachable after that. There was no information about Na's whereabouts or the main suspect, Charles. On the night of October 5th, investigators monitored the mobile phone signals of the 3 residents and the missing person, Maricela, and found that all 4 signals were coming from within the house. By early morning, the signals had moved to a remote wooded area in suburban Dallas. Shortly after, the signals vanished. A few days later, Lisa briefly responded to messages on her secondary work phone, but it soon became unreachable as well. Using geolocation data from the mobile devices, authorities reconstructed the group's route that night, identifying the stops they made along the way. This information led them to suspect that the missing student's body might have been disposed of in this area. Although this narrowed down the search radius, the area was vast and challenging to navigate, hindering the progress of the investigation. The search for the missing Seattle student was suspended near the new year, as no body or clues were found. However, in March 2021, a local hunter discovered a human skull in the woods that appeared to be relatively recent. The hunter immediately reported the find to the police, who then sent the remains to a forensic laboratory for examination. Dental records confirmed that the remains belonged to the missing student, who had been gone for nearly 6 months. Although the body was badly decomposed and damaged by wild animals, making it impossible to determine the exact cause of death, forensic analysis revealed characteristic marks on the bones that suggested knife wounds. However, it was unclear whether these wounds were fatal. After the authorities found the body in the forest, they quickly identified the first suspects and tracked down Lisa, who had moved to Florida with her partner, Na. They had rented a house in Miami near the ocean. However, when the police arrived, only Na was apprehended, while Lisa went into hiding after learning about the situation. Charles, another suspect, was nowhere to be found, although he occasionally contacted his former girlfriends through messaging apps. In one of his last messages, Charles warned his acquaintances that the police were closing in and that they should be extremely careful. Meanwhile, Na, who was now in custody, denied any involvement in Marcella's disappearance, claiming she knew nothing about what had happened to her. Lisa, on the other hand, used her connections to try to hire a good lawyer for Na. While in Florida, Na attempted to sell her house in South Carolina as quickly as possible, likely to raise funds for their continued hiding or to flee the country. Authorities eventually tracked down Lisa and arrested her, and both women were taken back to Dallas. During initial questioning, neither woman provided any information, and their bail was set at $500,000 each. They were able to post bail and were released to house arrest, but were required to wear tracking devices that allowed authorities to monitor their movements. In August of the same year, Charles made a daring escape attempt, but police were hot on his trail and tracked him down to Utah, where he was hiding at the home of a former girlfriend. She, who had a 5-year-old son with Charles, was overjoyed to see him and didn't ask questions about his sudden return. When Charles was arrested, he initially refused to cooperate with the police or answer their questions. He was counting on his wealthy lover to use her influence and wealth to hire a top-notch lawyer to get him out of trouble. However, things took a dramatic turn on Christmas Eve in 2021. Lisa and Nina, who had been released on bail, suddenly went dark when their tracking bracelet stopped working due to the holiday chaos and high activity. The police didn't send a team to the suspect's location until the next day, but by then, they had already vanished. It was later discovered that the suspects had been carefully planning their escape for months. As a result, by the time the police pursued them, they had already crossed the border into Mexico undetected. From Mexico, they traveled to South Korea by air, and their trail eventually went cold in Cambodia. The FBI teamed up with the Cambodian police and immigration authorities to locate the suspects on the run. They women first raised suspicions after making a large cash withdrawal from an ATM, prompting authorities to monitor their movements. They tried to pay for everything in cash to stay under the radar, but security footage helped reveal their whereabouts. An ATM camera identified the fugitives, and another camera caught the license plate of the vehicle they arrived in. The vehicle's owner cooperated with police and took them to the residence where the foreign women were living extravagantly. They were recaptured in February 2022 and sent back to the United States, where they were taken into custody without the possibility of bail, ensuring they went directly to jail to face the law. Charles realized that his lover was only looking out for herself and had no intention of helping him avoid prison. This led him to decide to cooperate with the investigation and share information. His detailed account of the events that took place that night shocked many. Bellin admitted to being in a romantic relationship with Lisa, the homeowner, and her spouse, Na, but claimed it was motivated by financial gain and a desire to further his music career. He did not have genuine feelings for these women and instead often pursued younger, attractive women, openly engaging in numerous affairs. On October 5, 2020, Chuck met Maricela, a young student, at a nightclub. They spent the evening drinking and dancing together, and he eventually invited her back to his place. Maricela agreed, and when they arrived, Chuck's roommates, Na and Lisa, were already asleep. Chuck and Maricela went to his room, where they engaged in intimate activities and fell asleep. Later that night, Lisa woke up and entered Chuck's room, where she saw Maricela sleeping next to him. This triggered a jealous outburst, and Lisa went to the kitchen to grab a large knife. She then returned to Chuck's room and attacked Maricela, repeatedly striking her with the knife. Charles reported that he was woken up by a noise and was initially disoriented due to intoxication. When he turned on the light, he was met with a disturbing scene. Mariela's body had fallen to the floor beside the bed, where she had lost a significant amount of blood. Na entered the room, and both Charles and Na stood there for a few minutes, failing to provide any assistance to the victim. Once Charles regained his composure, he realized that he might be blamed for the crime due to his prior record, and that his influential acquaintances might avoid punishment. He claimed that this is why he agreed to help dispose of the body and conceal the crime. Charles stayed with friends for several days and, upon returning to collect his belongings, noticed that the blood stains on the floor and carpet had almost completely disappeared. Lisa informed him that she and Na had taken care of everything and destroyed the evidence of the crime. The three individuals involved decided it was best to leave town for a while and observe from a distance what would happen next. Lisa Dyke-Bell's defense team argued that she had no motive to harm she. According to her lawyer, Lisa's relationship with Chuck was purely professional, and she saw his music career as a valuable investment. She claimed that his personal relationships and interactions with others did not concern her. A key point made by her defense was that Lisa had recently gotten married to Moran and was happy in her relationship. However, it was unclear why she and her wife had decided to take the surname of their young lodger, Charles, after their wedding, despite claiming he was insignificant to them. During the trial, Lisa portrayed Charles as hot-tempered and cruel, especially when intoxicated, and stated that she feared him. Lisa's account of the events that night claims that Chuck brought a new woman home from the club, but their encounter turned violent when an argument broke out. Chuck allegedly grabbed a knife in a fit of rage. Lisa and Nina intervened, trying to separate they, but it was too late. Maricela was already dead. Chuck then coerced Lisa and Nina into helping him dispose of the body and clean up the crime scene, threatening to harm them if they didn't comply. However, a witness who testified in court, a friend of Lisa's, painted a different picture. According to the friend, Lisa was intensely fixated on Chuck and had often expressed a desire to get rid of any woman who got close to him. The friend suggested that Lisa's emotions got the better of her that night. The friend also mentioned a peculiar detail, a statue of Santa Muerte in Lisa's home, which was part of an improvised altar. Lisa had jokingly told her friend that she was into black magic and knew how to cast a spell to make a man loyal only to her. The ritual apparently did not work as planned, and she turned to using a knife instead. A real estate agent who was approached by the women shortly after the incident testified that they were desperate to sell several properties they owned as quickly as possible. They also wanted to put their home in Dallas up for sale, but were unable to do so while the investigation was ongoing because the house was a crime scene. The situation took a turn for the worse when the remains of she were found. At this point, Lisa and Nina were willing to sell the property at a significantly reduced price, just to get the money quickly. During the trial, the court considered Charles's full confession and his cooperation with the investigation. However, things took a turn for the worse for the fugitives after they attempted to flee to another continent. In March 2023, Lisa Dyke Beltran was convicted of a heinous crime against 23-year-old Maricela, as well as tampering with evidence and attempting to escape. She received a life sentence with no possibility of parole. Charles Beltran and Nina Morin, on the other hand, pleaded guilty and cooperated with the investigation. They were found guilty of concealing evidence. Nina received a 7-year prison sentence, but may be eligible for release in 3 years if she exhibits good behavior. Charles, who had prior convictions, was sentenced to 12 years in prison with the possibility of parole after serving 8 years. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Susan Reinert. Susan Reinert, known to many as Sue, was born in 1943 in the town of Ridgeway, northwestern Pennsylvania. Her parents, William and Jane Gallagher, were a significant influence on her early life. Her father managed a newspaper, while her mother was a dedicated school teacher, which later shaped her path. As a child, Susan demonstrated a clear passion for learning and a natural love for literature, following in her mother's footsteps. She pursued higher education at Grove City College, where she met Kenneth Reinert, a young Air Force enlistee. Their chance encounter blossomed into a romance as they studied together. Susan's determination paid off as she earned her bachelor's degree. After achieving her initial goal, Susan pursued further education, earning a master's degree in English from Pennsylvania State University in 1966. She had married Kenneth in 1965, shortly after graduating from Grove City College, and they began a life filled with adventure as a military couple, moving to various duty stations across the country. Their military life took them to different parts of the country, including Sacramento, California, Rome, New York, and even Puerto Rico, before they eventually settled in the Philadelphia region. However, in 1971, Susan and Kenneth decided to separate, marking the end of their marriage. Despite the divorce, they parted ways amicably, without any legal disputes. As a single mother, Susan focused on creating a warm and loving home for her 2 children, Karen and Michael. She was a dedicated teacher and a beloved colleague and educator at Chestnut Walled Elementary School, known for her friendly and warm nature. Outside of her professional life, Susan was actively involved in Parents Without Partners, playing a crucial role in the Valley Forge chapter. After her mother's death, Susan found comfort in her connection with the organization Parents Without Partners. Despite facing challenges, she remained strong, relying on the organization for support. As she navigated her grief and a significant inheritance, her life became increasingly complex. However, she seemed to be managing well thanks to her strong ability to cope and a supportive network. On the evening of June 22, 1979, Susan and her 2 children spent what would be their last day together. Earlier that day, her son Michael had spent time with his father Kenneth, a personnel officer at Fidelity Bank. They had played in a father-son softball game, but left early when Susan arrived to pick Michael up around 8:30 p.m. Later that evening, Michael called his father to apologize for leaving the game early. Susan also called her former in-laws, Florence and John Reinhardt, with whom she remained close despite her divorce. With a full tank of gas, Susan was prepared for the drive to Allentown, Pennsylvania, about an hour north. She planned to attend a Parents Without Partners conference and use the trip as a weekend getaway with her children. Susan had planned a weekend getaway with her 2 children, Karen, 11 years old, and Michael, 10 years old. They were supposed to leave on Saturday morning to attend events, but on Friday evening, around 9 p.m., they unexpectedly departed. The children had been outside collecting hailstones from a summer storm, and shortly after, neighbors heard Susan's car start up and saw it leave the driveway. Susan had been having an affair with William Bradfield, a fellow teacher, which had put a strain on her marriage to Kenneth. Rumors had circulated that Susan and Bradfield might get married. On June 22, 1979, Susan visited her boyfriend before embarking on a trip with her children to Allentown, about 49 miles north. They had planned to spend the night in a motel, but instead of arriving at their destination, Susan and her children vanished. 2 days after Susan Reinert and her children vanished, the community cared for them deeply was overcome with concern and uncertainty. On June 25, 1979, their fears were realized when Susan's orange Plymouth hatchback was found in the Hostin Hotel parking lot in Harrisburg, 87 miles from Allentown and 97 miles from her home. Tragically, her body was discovered in the back of the vehicle. The details of her death were horrific. Susan's body was found nude, battered, and bound in chains, curled up in the wheel well of her car. Her hands were tied, and she had 2 black eyes. It appeared that she had been either beaten with chains or tied so tightly that the chains had caused severe bruising on her back. To make matters worse, she had been given a lethal dose of morphine. The disappearance of her 2 children remained a mystery, however, with no signs of their whereabouts. Police were left searching for answers, with the children seemingly vanished into thin air. The police searched for hours, hoping to find Susan's children with a babysitter, but none of her regular sitters, friends, or family members had seen them that weekend. As a result, the police began investigating to find answers. To gather leads, the police published pictures of the Reinert family in newspapers for weeks. This was before the internet and Amber Alerts existed, making it more challenging to disseminate information quickly. As the investigation continued, it was discovered that Susan Reinert had named William Bradfield, the man she believed she would marry, as the beneficiary of life insurance policies worth $730,000. This revelation raised suspicions that the children might have been killed to allow Bradfield to receive the substantial financial windfall. However, Bradfield had a solid alibi, as he was at the beach in Cape May, New Jersey, during the weekend when Susan was killed and her children disappeared. Several other teachers were with him and could vouch for his whereabouts. The police then shifted their focus to Upper Marin High School, where Susan worked. The school was facing several difficulties and challenges. The principal, J.C. Smith, had been involved in a scandal. He had been fired the previous year, being arrested at a local shopping center, where a search of his Ford Granada revealed loaded handguns, a hooded mask, and various tools associated with burglary. Additionally, a syringe filled with morphine was found in his trunk. Jay's life was already unraveling before his wife's cancer diagnosis. In 1977, his wife was diagnosed with an aggressive form of cancer, which she would eventually succumb to in August 1979. During her illness, she kept a diary, documenting her husband's increasingly bizarre behavior. Jay had begun engaging in consensual non-monogamous activities, including group sex and partner swapping, to which his wife strongly objected. This behavior seemed to be a precursor to even more alarming actions. Around the same time, their daughter, Stephanie, moved back in with her parents, bringing her husband Edward Hunsberger with her. The family was already dealing with the uncertainty of her mother's cancer battle, and tensions were running high among them. Edward Hunsberger and his wife Stephanie, Jay's daughter and son-in-law, struggled with heroin addiction and had trouble finding steady employment in the years leading up to their move. In an effort to escape their struggles with addiction, they moved back in with Jay family in early 1978. However, just a few months after the move, Stephanie and Edward mysteriously vanished. The last confirmed sighting of they was in February 1978, when they visited Edward's parents in North Wales, Pennsylvania. Before leaving, they mentioned that they would return to visit soon. However, after this point, all contact with them ceased. Edward failed to appear at a scheduled meeting with his probation officer later that month, prompting authorities to begin searching for him and Stephanie. When investigators reached out to Jay for information, he claimed that they had left for California to escape debts owed to local drug dealers. Despite his assertions, Jay was unable to provide any further details about their disappearance. Edward and Stephanie had been constantly on the move, traveling from place to place and never staying in one location for too long, making it easy for them to disappear without anyone noticing. Meanwhile, Jay was arrested for theft, and a search of his home uncovered some disturbing items. Authorities found firearms, marijuana, prescription pills, security guard uniforms and badges, as well as disturbing pornography. They also discovered nitric acid and stolen office equipment from a local school. Jay was linked to a string of recent armed robberies matching his description and attire. While awaiting sentencing for the theft charge, Jay's alibi witness, Bradfield, testified that they were on vacation during the time of the robberies. However, the jury did not find Bradfield's testimony credible. Jay had a notorious reputation at Upper Merion, earning him the nickname, the Prince of Darkness. This was especially relevant in the investigation of Susan's death, which was caused by strangulation or suffocation. The time frame for her death was broad, and when questioned about his whereabouts, Jay couldn't provide a clear answer. The autopsy found that Susan's body had an extremely high amount of morphine, roughly 10 times the amount needed to be fatal, which indicates that her overdose was likely a deliberate act. As the investigation into Susan's death continued, Jay was found guilty of a series of store robberies in the late 1970s. He was sentenced to 2 to 5 years in prison on June 25, 1979. However, even behind bars, Jay remained a key suspect in the investigation into Susan's death. The police began to dig deeper into his past, uncovering a disturbing discovery. Jay's daughter and son-in-law had gone missing in similar circumstances to Susan and her children. There were two main connections between Jay and the disappearances. Firstly, large quantities of morphine had been discovered in Jay's house a few months earlier. Secondly, a plastic comb with Jay's military unit was found in Susan's car. The disappearances of Jay's daughter and son-in-law shared striking similarities with the disappearance of Susan's children. The investigation revealed a shocking series of events that had a lasting impact on the public. However, the most shocking revelation was yet to come. In late July 1979, about a month after Susan's body was discovered near Harrisburg, investigators stumbled upon a potential motive for the crime. In her official documents, Susan referred to Bradfield as her future husband. As the police investigated further, they determined that Susan's death occurred between midnight on Saturday, June 23, 1979, and midnight on Sunday, June 24. Bradfield and his colleagues arrived in Cape Cod at 5 a.m. on Saturday and stayed until Monday afternoon, June 25. However, there was a gap in Bradfield's alibi, as his exact whereabouts during the time of Susan's disappearance were unclear. Investigations also revealed that Susan had withdrawn large sums of money from her accounts, totaling around $25,000. She had told bank employees that she planned to invest the money in high-yielding investments managed by Bradfield, whom she trusted as her future husband. Unbeknownst to Susan, Bradfield was leading a double life, dating multiple women, including a fellow English teacher, with whom he had a secret relationship spanning nearly a decade. Bradfield had promised Susan that he would handle her investments and assured her they would be profitable, providing a way for they to fund their upcoming wedding and move to England. However, investigators found fake stocks and bonds in Susan's home, which were actually forgeries created by Bradfield. He had sold these worthless securities to Susan, using fictional companies to make them appear legitimate. This discovery added a new dimension to the narrative, revealing a significant financial motive. Bradfield was required to testify in a lawsuit in March 1980 but initially refused to answer questions, referring them to his lawyers instead. His lawyers denied any wrongdoing but were open to negotiating a settlement to resolve the matter and distribute Susan's estate, which was worth approximately $7 million. In June 1980, Bradfield testified in a civil trial, downplaying his involvement in the case. He contradicted Susan's claims about their relationship, saying it was not as serious as she had told others. He denied plans to marry Susan later that year, despite her having shared these plans with multiple people. Bradfield also made an unsubstantiated claim that Susan had an affair with Jay Smith, the former principal of her high school, but this accusation was not supported by any evidence. Friends and family members remembered Susan being in a long-term relationship with Bradfield, with no indication of a relationship with Jay Smith, who was actually in prison at the time of the trial. Bradfield failed to explain why Susan had named him the beneficiary of her $1 million estate. Instead, he portrayed Susan as an irresponsible person who frequently got into trouble, and he blamed her for her problems, claiming he was only trying to help her deal with the consequences. As the investigation into the missing $25,000 continued, Susan's brother and ex-husband filed a second lawsuit in June 1980 to claim the $450,000 life insurance policy taken out on Susan's life just before her death. The goal was to use the funds to conduct a private investigation. However, the case took a surprising turn when Bradfield was arrested on February 20, 1981, and charged with 2 counts of theft and 1 count of conspiracy related to the $25,000. Wendy Ziegler, a former student of Bradfield's, was also charged as a co-conspirator in the case. Bradfield was released on bail on February 23, 1981, and was set to go on trial the following month. However, the trial was preempted when the original civil lawsuit was settled out of court. As a result of the settlement, $36,000 from Susan's estate was set aside to cover the costs of further investigations into the disappearance of the children and to contest certain provisions of Susan's will. Bradfield's 5-day trial ended on August 3, 1981, with a guilty verdict for theft. The prosecutor, Edward Weiss, requested that Bradfield's bond be increased from $25,000 to $75,000 due to concerns that the conviction would increase the risk of him fleeing, particularly in light of potential murder charges. Judge Robert A. Wright granted this request. On April 6, 1983, Pennsylvania state troopers arrested Bradfield and charged him with multiple crimes, including 3 counts of murder, conspiracy to commit murder, kidnapping, and obstructing the law. A grand jury found evidence that Bradfield was aware of the plot to kill Susan and her children and had likely participated in these crimes. Although J.C. Smith, a suspected accomplice, was not charged at that time, a confession from a fellow inmate, Proctor Noel, implicated Bradfield. Noel stated that while playing chess with Bradfield in prison, Bradfield revealed his involvement in the murders. Despite the lack of direct physical evidence linking Bradfield to the crimes, prosecutors felt they had a strong case against him. A previous conviction for theft also bolstered their confidence, as did a potential connection to a person who may have disposed of the victims' bodies, which further implicated Bradfield in the murders that occurred in the 1980s. J.C. Smith was forced to testify before a grand jury in 1984, despite invoking his Fifth Amendment right. The questioning was likely related to the disappearance of his daughter, Stephanie, and her husband, Edward Huntsberger. Around the same time, William Bradfield was also called to testify, but the details of his statements were not made public. In April 1985, J.C. Smith was asked to provide handwriting samples that may have been linked to documents written years earlier, possibly outlining a plan to murder Susan Leinert. This led to Jay's arrest on June 25, 1985, exactly 6 years after Susan's body was found. He was charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder and taken into custody. While Jay awaited trial, a book about the case was published by crime author Joseph Wambaugh in 1984, suggesting that Smith was the killer. The book was later adapted into a TV miniseries, drawing national attention to the case. Despite this, Jay maintained his innocence from prison, filing appeals and claiming that William Bradfield had framed him. In 1989, the court decided to re-examine Jay's case and discovered problems with the prosecution's handling of the case. This led to a new trial in 1990. Jay waived his right to a speedy trial to allow for a thorough investigation. By 1992, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court ruled in Jay's favor, overturning his murder conviction due to issues with the prosecution's conduct. For 20 years, the state did not pursue a new trial against J.C. Smith, allowing him to live the rest of his life without further prosecution. Meanwhile, William Bradfield continuously disregarded court orders and refused to pay the $25,000 he owed to the estate of Susan Reinert. This issue was finally resolved in a settlement in 1996. J.C. Smith went on to file lawsuits against the state and Joseph Wambaugh, claiming defamation and conspiracy. However, both suits were eventually dismissed. On January 16, 1998, William Bradfield, who had been in prison for over a decade, was found unresponsive in his cell and pronounced dead due to cardiac arrest. Kenneth Reinert, the ex-husband of Susan Reinert, passed away in June 2002 without ever knowing what happened to their two missing children. J.C. Smith, whose conviction was overturned in 1992, wrote books about the case and remarried in 2002. He died on May 12, 2009, leaving many questions about his involvement in the 1978 disappearance of his daughter and son-in-law, Stephanie and Edward Huntsberger, still unanswered. Hello, crime enthusiasts, are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Sean Eckerd. Donna and Samuel Eckerd were a couple who were related before they got married. Both had experienced unsuccessful marriages before and had a total of 6 adult children. After a difficult past, they found peace with each other and decided to move to San Diego, California, to start a new life. There, they rented a spacious house and regularly attended local church activities on weekends. The family was very religious and lived a quiet life without much social interaction. A few years after moving, the family welcomed their first son, Stanley, and 2 years later, their second son, Sean. Donna devoted all her time to taking care of the house and raising the 2 children, so the boys grew up surrounded by love and care. Both attended a good local school. On weekends, the family participated in church activities. As adults, the 2 children left their parents to start their own family's acros. The country. However, the Eckerd family still maintained a close relationship. They often contacted each other, called each other, and spent all their holidays together. Sean was a cheerful and easygoing boy. He was attractive, intelligent, and a good listener, so he made friends easily. In contrast, Stanley was a bit shy and found socializing difficult. He was often reserved about new things and had trouble communicating with his younger brother. Despite their different personalities, the 2 brothers were very close and cared for each other. They had the same group of friends and were always ready to help one another. Both were well-behaved and good at studying. The relationship between Sean and Stanley was very good. They trusted each other and often joked happily. Their parents also supported this relationship. In the family, mutual respect was highly valued. Donna and Samuel raised their children in the faith and the law of God from an early age. The Eckerd family lived quietly. Vs. As they grew up, the 2 brothers developed very different interests. Sean, the youngest, played in a band, while Stanley, the oldest, loved martial arts. Every evening, the family gathered before dinner to share their experiences of the day. Sean was usually the first to tell a story, and stories about music, friends, and his future plans took up most of the time. Everyone listened attentively to Sean. Stanley, on the other hand, had few opportunities to share and did not feel like he had much to say. He had no big plans for the future, nor interesting stories or experiences with friends to hold attention. So Stanley often listened quietly to his younger brother's stories. One evening, Sean told his family about Mary Jane, his new neighbor. She was a beautiful young woman with bright brown eyes and long blonde hair. Sean was fascinated by the wonderful piano music coming from her house. Enthralled by the music, Sean boldly entered the house without knocking. Although the situation was somewhat awkward, Sean handled it with confidence and grace, making a good impression on Mary Jane. Although she was a few years older than Sean, they became close friends. Sean often organized picnics and invited Mary Jane to join. They went on many walks together, visiting parks and observatories. However, their budding romance was interrupted by the difficulties of adult life. The Eckerd family received news that Donna, Sean's mother, was seriously ill. Sean's parents tried to consider the interests of everyone in the family when making a decision, but this completely changed their lives. Although Sean did not want to leave his hometown, friends, and Mary Jane, he was forced to accept his parents' decision. In 2005, the Eckerd family decided to leave the city where they had lived for many years and move to another state. They settled in Donna's mother's house in the small town of Spring Hill, Florida. This decision brought many positive changes to the whole family. Donna began to recover. Initially, Sean felt sad about leaving the band, familiar places, and friends, especially Mary Jane. However, with his optimistic personality, Sean quickly adapted to his new life. Gradually, he realized that life in Spring Hill was as full and meaningful as in the old place. Donna and Samuel found stable jobs at the Presbyterian church, where they spent most of their time. Donna worked at the nursery, taking care of children, while Samuel assisted at the chapel. Gradually, the two brothers regained their close relationship and made friends at their new school. Their lives seemed to be reborn in this new environment. Sean continued to join the school band, while Stanley attended a martial arts school near his new home. Despite his busy life, Sean could not stop thinking about Mary Jane. Every night after school, Sean would stay in his room and talk on the phone for hours. The conversations always ended with Sean promising to meet his girlfriend again. He promised to visit her as soon as his parents allowed it. While Sean kept his first love in his heart, his older brother Stanley tried to assert himself in the family. Stanley had a quiet and humble personality and seemed to receive little attention from his parents. In order to attract attention, he made many wrong decisions, which had serious consequences for the whole family. In May 2006, he informed his parents of his intention to drop out of school to pursue a martial arts career and open a martial arts club. However, due to the recklessness of youth, he joined a bad group, where he began to engage in petty fraud and experiment with illegal drugs. By 2007, bad relationships led to Stanley's arrest for theft and fraud. The news of his eldest son's wrongdoing shocked Donna, causing her to be hospitalized for a heart attack. Fortunately, the situation was quickly resolved with the help of a lawyer. This lawyer skillfully defended Stanley by pointing out the lack of direct evidence, helping him to be quickly released and receive only a suspended sentence. This incident left Stanley extremely scared, feeling guilty, hoping for sympathy and acceptance from his family. Meanwhile, after experiencing the terrifying events that happened to Stanley, Sean did not tell his parents about his decision. During the summer vacation, he worked as a waiter to save money. He then left a note for his mother, informing her that he was going to California to meet Mary Jane. The 2-day bus ride to Sean's lover seemed endless. The scenery changed, day turned to night, and Sean looked forward to meeting Mary Jane at the final destination. When the bus stopped, Sean eagerly ran to her, having seen her radiant face and long hair through the window. They spent the happiest days together, going on picnics like in high school. For the first time, Sean expressed his love to Mary, and she returned his feelings. After a walk, Sean and Mary Jane sat down on a bench. Suddenly, Sean felt dizzy, his vision went black, and he fainted. He was rushed to the hospital, his health rapidly deteriorating. Mary Jane contacted Sean's sister, Jennifer, who hurried to California. Doctors determined that the cause of Sean's rapid deterioration was a tick-borne disease. The disease developed suddenly and rapidly, causing many complications, including encephalitis. A grueling battle to save Sean's life began, with doctors working tirelessly for a long time to bring him back to health. After more than a month in a coma and 6 months of rehabilitation, Sean was saved. His recovery was arduous. It was surprising that a small tick bite during a summer walk could cause such a serious illness. Jennifer took her brother back to Florida for further treatment and long-term recovery. Mary Jane was forced to stay behind, only able to communicate with her boyfriend by phone. Despite the hardships and unexpected illness, these events brought the Eckerd family closer together. Donna did her best to help her beloved son Sean overcome his serious illness. She closely monitored his diet and exercise regimen. This devoted care helped Sean recover completely, but also caused Stanley to gradually harbor resentment and jealousy. After recovering, Sean continued his music studies and graduated in 2009. He dreamed of introducing Mary Jane, his favorite, to his family. However, this plan did not work out. Instead, Stanley introduced his younger brother to Samantha Rowe. Samantha, a native of Florida, quickly became friends with the two brothers. Stanley was fond of her and sympathetic towards her, while she was attracted to Sean's cheerful and outgoing personality. For a while, Stanley actively pursued Samantha, and she reciprocated his interest. They had a few romantic dates, ending in passionate kisses. Stanley was very happy, but Samantha, despite accepting his advances, could not stop thinking about Sean. Samantha wrote Sean a text message expressing her emotional and inviting him to go for a walk. Sean agreed, and the wife spent the evening walking along the river, talking about Stanley and Mary Jane. Sean had no intention of winning Samantha over because he already had a girlfriend. After being rejected, Samantha sent Stanley a text message, falsely claiming that Sean had met her and confessed that he liked her. Stanley was very angry. That night, he went up to Sean's room and they talked. At first, they spoke quietly, then argued loudly, and finally fell completely silent. The parents did not intervene in the quarrel between the two brothers because they were used to it. It was the mother who first discovered Sean missing when he did not answer the phone. The night before, Stanley had explained to his mother that Sean had left after an argument. After 2 days of searching, the police received an unusual call from Sean's sister, Jennifer. In the call, they heard only a woman's screams and a man's moans in the background. After being asked repeatedly to calm down, Jennifer finally spoke clearly to the police. She was still screaming for help and reported that her brother Stanley had killed Sean. She said that Stanley was in the house talking to his mother and that Stanley's father, Samuel, was lying next to Sean's body. She pleaded for immediate help. The police arrived at the crime scene and found a horrific sight in the backyard. Samuel was on his knees, his hands full as he tried to pull his son's body from the wet ground. He screamed and wiped the dirt off Sean. The once peaceful neighborhood, with its beautiful lawns where the two brothers often waved to neighbors, had now become the scene of a tragedy. The Eckerd family, who had happily raised 2 sons, now faced terrible grief. One son was dead, and the other was under arrest. Stanley was arrested on suspicion of murder. During his initial interview, he claimed he had no intention of killing his brother. In a fit of rage, Stanley had hit Sean in the head, causing him to fall and die. After realizing his brother was dead, Stanley White tied up the body and buried it in the backyard. During the investigation, Stanley said, "I buried him. After all, that's what you do with dead people." This statement sounded cold and emotionless, more like the words of a serial killer than those of a loving brother. To justify his actions, Stanley said that he did it for his mother, he wanting to protect her from the shock of hearing about Sean's death. Stanley planned to move and rebury his younger brother's body after their parents died. During the interrogation, Stanley displayed many different emotions. At times he cried, confessed, and showed remorse, claiming it was an accident. But at other times, he showed hatred and spoke harshly about Sean. He blamed his younger brother for all his troubles and admitted that Sean had won the competition for the love of their mother and Samantha. On the day of the incident, Stanley was charged with second-degree murder and held without bail. 2 days later, Dr. Barbara Wolfe performed an autopsy on Sean and submitted the forensic report to the court. The results showed that the victim had bruises under the skin and rope marks on his neck, indicating that he had been compressed, causing difficulty breathing. The cause of death was determined to be blunt force trauma to the head and asphyxiation. Assistant State Attorney Pete McGough investigated the case thoroughly. On February 25, 2011, the first hearing took place, with District Judge Stephen Rushing presiding. Stanley's parents, Donna and Samuel Eckerd, sat in the second row, crying as they watched their eldest son being led into the courtroom. On April 9, 2013, Stanley Eckerd's trial began in the Hernando Courthouse, with District Judge Anthony Taddy presiding. Attorney Alan Hunter represented the defendant, and Pete McGough was the prosecutor. The prosecutor tried to prove that Stanley had carefully planned the murder. The defense attorney argued that it was just a random fight that went horribly wrong. He also highlighted Stanley's attempts to conceal the crime as a sign of remorse. Stanley Eckerd is charged with first-degree murder and could face life in prison if convicted. The trial is scheduled to last 5 days, starting May 13. Judge Anthony Taddy will make the final decision. If convicted of second-degree murder, Stanley could still face life in prison. Stanley Eckerd has always maintained that he did not intend to kill his brother. 3 years ago, before burying his brother's body in their front yard, Eckerd rejected a prosecutor's offer to plead guilty to second-degree murder in exchange for a maximum 20-year prison sentence. Eckerd remained calm as the clerk read the verdict. The brothers' parents, Samuel and Donna, wept silently as the jury left the courtroom. Samuel Eckerd's sobs turned to screams, and several relatives gathered around to comfort him. The jury agreed that Stanley did not intend to kill his 19-year-old brother, Sean, but they did not completely exonerate him. After about 2.5 hours of deliberation, the jury of 9 women and 3 men found Stanley Eckerd guilty of second-degree murder. However, the Eckerd family still believes Stanley's account of the events that occurred in the early morning hours of June 19, 2010, and criticized the state attorney's office for bringing the case. Samuel Eckerd, Stanley's father, praised Chief Assistant Public Defender Alan Lanter for his good work in defending the case. The family questioned the appropriateness of the verdict and appealed, but their appeal was denied. Samuel expressed surprise that the jury reached its verdict so quickly but insisted that the family's belief remains unchanged. He also acknowledged one undeniable fact: after his younger brother died, Stanley dragged Sean's body out of his bedroom window and buried it in the backyard of their Spring Hill home. Samuel discovered Sean's body 2 days later. Assistant District Attorney Pete began his closing by showing the jury a photo of Sean's body rolled up in the dirt. Pete emphasized that this was not a cold case and pointed out that Stanley had changed his story several times when questioned about his younger brother's death. Pete went on to say that after Sean's funeral, Stanley forged text messages from Sean's phone, claiming he was in California with his girlfriend. Stanley also forged letters from Sean to Samantha, telling her not to contact him and to focus on Stanley instead. Finally, After hours of questioning, Stanley admitted that Sean had died in a fight in the bedroom. Stanley said he heard Sean's neck snap as they hit the floor. Stanley hid the body to protect his mother, who had heart problems, and planned to tell his father after she left for work. Pete concluded that Stanley caused the injuries that led to Sean's death, which constituted murder. He highlighted Stanley's statement to police about a dispute involving Samantha, as well as Stanley's conversation with his younger brother and a friend about revenge beefo. Sean died. During that conversation, the friend said Stanley mentioned that if he wanted to kill someone, he would hit them in the back of the head and bury them in the yard. However, this evidence was not strong enough to eliminate all reasonable doubt. Alan Lanter, defending, argued that the crime did not involve a deliberate act. Stanley was involved in his younger brother's death, but it was not murder, he said. Alan cited the medical examiner's testimony, saying that the blow to the head, combined with the swelling of his brain from encephalitis, could have caused his death. The pathologist also confirmed that hitting his head on the nightstand and the two fell could have been enough to cause Sean's death. Finally, Alan reminded the jury of Donna Eckert's testimony, which stated that Sean had severe mood swings after suffering from encephalitis. In her testimony, Donna Eckert even called Sean's death an accident. The jury could have found Stanley Eckert guilty of third-degree murder or manslaughter, making this an excusable homicide case. Attorney Allen asked the jury not to let the gruesome images of Sean's body and Stanley's actions in burying it distract them from the real cause of his death. Stanley Eckert did a terrible thing after Sean died, but he was not a murderer, Allen stressed. During the final trial, Eckert's parents were devastated when Judge Anthony sentenced Samuel Eckert to 50 years in prison without parole. They felt as if they had lost both their sons on the same day. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Anna Walsh. Anna Walsh was born on April 18, 1983, in Belgrade, Serbia. She grew up in a cultured family alongside her younger sister. Anna attended the 5th Belgrade Gymnasium, where she distinguished herself as an outstanding student. She then pursued higher education at Belgrade Research University, the oldest and largest university in Serbia, focusing on foreign languages. She earned a master's degree in French language and literature. At 22, Anna graduated and decided to explore new opportunities in the United States, with her family's full support. In 2005, she began her American journey and settled in the U.S. with the goal of advancing her education in hospitality management. She took on administrative positions at renowned hotels, including the Inn at Little Washington in Virginia, which is part of the prestigious Relais and Chateaux collection. Anna's friendly nature, approachability, and strong sense of responsibility helped her quickly rise in her career, earning the respect of her colleagues and managers. Anna was multilingual and skilled at resolving conflicts, which helped her easily connect with others. She was well-liked by her colleagues and had a group of friends. Anna took every opportunity to shine in her career. She became a U.S. citizen while keeping her Serbian nationality, earned a high income, and invested in her own home and car. Her travels expanded her perspective, and she was promoted to senior manager. Known for her intelligence, beauty, slender figure, and bright smile, Anna attracted many admirers during her time at the Wheatley Hotel in Lenox, Massachusetts. There, she fell in love with Marcus O'Neill, the hotel's head chef, and they got married in 2009, with Anna adopting his last name. After got married with Marcus, Anna's life takes a turn when she meets Brian Walsh. Brian Walsh, born in July 1975 in Boston, Massachusetts, comes from a prominent and wealthy family. In his younger days, he would often borrow money from friends without paying them back. While in college, he would treat friends to meals at expensive restaurants, but would use various tricks to make sure they ended up paying for him. For years, Brian was estranged from his father, Dr. Thomas Walsh, and this distance continued until Thomas passed away in 2018. Their troubled relationship began when Brian deceitfully withdrew nearly $1 million from his father's personal account and vanished with the money. The father did not report his son to the police and even tried to convince him to return the stolen money. When Brian refused, Thomas cut off all communication with him. At the time of this serious theft, Brian's parents had been divorced for a long time, and his father had started a new family. Thomas decided to completely remove his eldest son from his life and his will. However, after Thomas passed away, Brian quickly asserted his claim and filed a lawsuit, alleging that the will was forged by Thomas' widow and younger children to deny him his rightful inheritance. Unfortunately, he could not provide any evidence to support his claims and did not receive any part of the estate. Many people who knew Brian described him as greedy, malicious, and very cruel. He often resorted to violence and struggled to control his emotions. He would get what he wanted using force, and when he was angry, he became a threat to others. Reports indicate that in the late 2000s, Brian received treatment at a psychiatric clinic to manage his anger, during which he was officially diagnosed with sociopathy. In 2014, a unique love story began when Anna met Brian, a hotel guest. At the time, Anna was married to Marcus O'Neill, who also worked at the hotel. Despite Anna's marriage, Brian was immediately attracted to her and began to pursue her with increasing intensity. Used to getting what he wanted and unwilling to accept rejection, he relentlessly sought Anna's attention. He eventually obtained her phone number and home address, where she lived with her husband, creating a troubling situation for all involved. In 2015, the O'Neill family had to involve the police due to Brian's relentless harassment, which occurred around the clock. He repeatedly pursued Anna, calling her at work, texting her personal phone, and insisting that she divorce her husband to be with him. The situation intensified when Brian threatened to harm Anna and her husband if she did not leave with him. The details that followed are unclear, particularly why Anna ultimately changed her mind. However, a year after, she surprisingly divorced her husband. A few months later, Brian became her second husband. The newlyweds moved into a luxurious home in Casson, Massachusetts, which is about 20 miles southeast of Boston, in a well-off neighborhood. They had 3 sons in quick succession, with the boys being born a couple of years apart. Anna chose not to take maternity leave and successfully balanced her job with being a mother, continuing to advance in her career. She became the regional general manager at Tishman Speyer, a real estate company, where she earned a high salary and became the primary breadwinner for the family. Since her job often required travel to Washington, D.C., she bought another home there in her name, where she stayed during business trips. During these trips, she relied on visiting nannies to help care for her children. What was Brian doing while his wife was busy expanding their family and advancing her career? Brian was unemployed. The $1 million he had once received from his father was running out, and everything his wife earned was carefully registered in her name. Brian was looking for easy ways to make money. Before marrying Anna, he had spent some time in South Korea, where he became friends with a wealthy people whose family owned an impressive art collection. After returning to the United States, Brian kept in touch with this friend, who unexpectedly asked for his help in selling several paintings by the famous artist Andy Warhol. Brian eagerly agreed but chose not only to sell the artworks for a commission, he wanted to profit from the transaction. He had a collection of abstract paintings by a renowned artist, titled Shadow. Brian assessed each painting and gathered the required documentation, including authenticity certificates. He then decided to create copies of both the paintings and the documentation. To do this, he contacted artists who could produce precise replicas of the paintings. Brian convinced the artists that he needed these copies as backups, since each original painting was valued at approximately $250,000. For several years, Brian successfully created and sold fake paintings as if they were originals to collectors from different countries. His scheme came to an end when one of his buyers, an art expert who specializes in Andy Warhol, quickly recognized forgery and took legal action against him. The FBI then launched an investigation, and in April 2021, he pleaded guilty to selling counterfeit art. As part of a deal negotiated by his lawyer, he was placed under house arrest instead of serving time in prison, on the condition that he return the money earned from the sale of the fake paintings to the buyers. Although Brian's movements were heavily restricted, he could leave his house twice a day to drop off and pick up his children from school. He also had 2.5 hours each morning to visit a limited number of approved places nearby, such as stores, pharmacies, and dry cleaners, to buy essential items. On December 31, 2022, the Walsh family was getting ready to celebrate New Year's Eve at home. Only Anna, Brian, and their 3 young sons were present. Because of their age, the boys went to bed early, leaving Anna and Brian at the dinner table. That day, Anna shared her last social media post, where she sent New Year's greetings and mentioned that the past year had been tough, but she and Brian were still together. Anna was supposed to fly to Washington, D.C. for work on January 3rd. However, when she didn't show up for work on January 4th and missed an important deal, her boss, Tishman Speyer, reported her missing to the police. Her phone had also been unreachable for several days. Brian also reported her missing, expressing concern that he had not been able to contact her for several days. According to Brian, he last saw Anna on January 1st. He claimed that she had woken him up early in the morning, saying there were some issues at work and that her boss had asked her to come in earlier than planned. He then believed that his wife had gone to the airport with only a few belongings. However, inconsistencies in the case soon emerged. First, Anna had not purchased, changed, or booked a flight on January 1st, nor had she canceled a flight scheduled for January 3rd. Second, she had not shown up at the airport on either January 1st or January 3rd. Third, how had she left the house? Her personal car was still in the garage, and she had not called a taxi. Brian suggested that she may have hitchhiked, but this theory was not convincing. Brian's statements and behavior raised many questions. His accounts were inconsistent, and he did not seem particularly interested in what was going on. Unable to contact Anna for more than 3 days, he only reported her missing on the 4th day, and only after her workplace called. Brian was considered the prime suspect from the start. However, law enforcement did not have sufficient grounds to arrest him or obtain a search warrant for his family home. They conducted only a cursory search with his permission, but nothing came of it. Brian maintained that he had lived a normal life during those 3 days, visiting shops regularly and doing housework. However, verifying his claims proved difficult. Each time he left the house, he forgot his phone, which he said was often taken away by his older children to play games without permission. On January 5th, police issued a public appeal on television, showing a photo of Anna and asking anyone with information about her whereabouts or fate to contact law enforcement immediately. However, no witnesses came forward. Anna was known to have called her mother and sister one last time on December 31st, making her husband the last person known to have seen her. Surveillance footage from the neighborhood provided no clues. Anna was not captured on any cameras on the morning of January 1st, as if she had never left the house. Her husband, on the other hand, was recorded leaving and returning multiple times, but his destination could not be determined. His claims of a trip to the grocery store were dismissed. His car was not seen in any footage of the route, nor was it spotted in the store. It wasn't until January 8 that Brian was arrested for perjury and taken to the police station for questioning while his home was finally searched. It was discovered that on January 1st, he had visited a hardware store in another area, not on the list of approved places he could visit while under house arrest. There, he spent nearly $500 on a large amount of cleaning supplies, plastic sheeting, duct tape, a mop with a bucket, and utility rags. He paid in cash, perhaps hoping his visit would go unnoticed. The initial search of the family home turned up nothing unusual or suspicious. Everything was in its place, and there were no signs of a struggle or traces of blood. However, when law enforcement descended into the basement, there was no doubt. It was the scene of a gruesome crime. Blood was everywhere, and hidden among the old furniture was a bloody knife and saw wrapped in towels. Brian had previously admitted that on January 3rd, he had visited his mother's house on the other side of town. He claimed that he had violated the terms of his house arrest because his mother needed help with housework due to her poor health. But after the grisly discoveries in the basement, police suspected that along the way, the man may have disposed of evidence or some of his deceased wife's body parts. All the trash cans in the area where he and his wife lived, as well as along the route to his mother's house, were checked. These searches were fruitful, and in one of them, a kitchen axe with traces of dried blood and several bloody towels similar to those found in the basement were discovered. Forensic analysis confirmed that the blood on the towels, knives, axes, and saws in the basement was that of the missing Anna, clearing any remaining doubts about her death. The search history on a laptop and a tablet seized from his home shows disturbing intentions. In the weeks leading up to his wife's disappearance, Brian searched the internet for information about the best states for divorce based on property division. He also looked into whether he could claim ownership of a second home in Washington, D.C. that belonged solely to Anna. This raises suspicions about his motives. At around 4 a.m. on January 1st, the first search made on the tablet was, "How long does it take for a body to start decomposing?" This search was followed by nearly 20 additional queries related to body disposal, such as how to clean up blood, how to dismember a body, whether a body could be identified without teeth, how long DNA can last, and if someone could be charged with a crime if the body was never discovered. All of these searches were conducted on the tablet belonging to his young child, who is the offspring of the woman he brutally harmed. By January 3rd, Brian was already looking up how and when someone can inherit property from a missing person. He seemed confident he could avoid punishment and was preparing to claim the inheritance. On January 18th, he was formally charged with his wife's murder, even though her body had not been found. Prosecutors believe that on the night of January 1st, Brian either deliberately or accidentally killed his wife. They suspect he then dismembered her body in their basement and placed the parts in plastic bags, disposing of them in trash bins around the city over the next few days. The area surrounding the Brian residence and within a few kilometers was carefully searched for evidence. Nearby wastelands, forests, and bodies of water were also investigated, but no findings were made. The defendant pleaded not guilty and did not reveal what he did with the body. Furthermore, it was disclosed that Anna had been feeling unhappy recently and had contemplated divorcing her husband. She expressed this concern multiple times during phone calls with her mother and sister. The day before her disappearance, she called her mother, asking her to fly from Serbia for a few days. However, her mother did not take her daughter seriously and decided to postpone the visit. Brian Walsh's trial is currently ongoing, and he is being held at the Norfolk Correctional Facility, waiting for his next court date. Anna's mother has been monitoring the investigation from Serbia, as she has not traveled to the United States. The Serbian Ministry of Foreign Affairs has reached out to the consulate in New York, which is coordinating with the Norfolk District Attorney's Office to ensure that Anna's mother receives timely updates about the investigation in court hearings. The 3 sons of the Walsh family are currently in state custody. Brian's family members do not want to care for them, mainly due to Anna's mother's age and health issues. Additionally, Anna's sister, who lives in Canada, has also refused to take in her nephews. The only person willing to take the boys is Anna's close friend, Pamela Bond, who prefers to care for them herself rather than see them separated and placed in different foster homes. As the investigation progresses and Brian Walsh's trial continues, it highlights the need to be aware of our relationships and the serious harm that can result from betrayal and deceit. While we do not yet know the final outcome for Brian Walsh, including whether he will face punishment or if Anna's body will ever be discovered, we will always remember Anna as a kind and loving person. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Chris Farmer and Peter Frampton. Peter Frampton was 24, while Chris Farmer was 25. He had decided to take his girlfriend on an adventure to explore faraway places and celebrate his achievements, while contemplating his future plans. Chris aimed to become a doctor, and he was dedicated to succeeding in that field. Recently, he had earned his medical degree, while his girlfriend, Peter, had graduated from law school. The families of Peter and Chris lived in the suburbs of Manchester, UK. Chris was the middle child among 3 siblings, his youngest sister Penny, his older brother Nigel, and himself. From a young age, Chris disliked restrictions and boundaries, but he was never aggressive or cruel. Instead, he had a free-spirited approach to life. The entire family was friendly and supportive of one another. Chris and Peter had met in school at age 14, and since then, they couldn't imagine life apart. Peter was active but more reserved, which helped balance Chris's enthusiasm. However, Peter and Chris decided to wait until after graduation to get married. Chris felt it was important to establish a stable foundation before starting a family, and Peter agreed with him. The couple loved to party and often took breaks to enjoy themselves. They frequently hosted themed gatherings, inviting many friends and acquaintances. Both had been working since a young age and had achieved financial independence. They held respected jobs, earned good salaries, and were able to travel. By that time, Peter and Chris had already explored Europe, visited Morocco, and traveled to various other destinations. In December 1977, they left their hometown for an adventure. Chris's younger sister, Penny, was envious of their journey. Chris and Peter spent about 6 months in Australia and loved it. They then decided to visit the Pacific Islands, explore the west coast of the United States, and eventually travel to Belize. They craved new experiences and want to live life to the fullest. Chris was passionate about traveling and often recorded video notes during his trips. He sent these videos and letters to his family, letting share in the adventures he had with Peter. On June 13, 1978, Chris' family and Peter's family received an update from them. They shared that they had been offered a short cruise along the coast on an American yacht called Dwayne Boston. This was a wonderful opportunity to enjoy some time on the open sea. Chris had loved sailing since he was young and was always captivated by large bodies of sea. In his letter, he excitedly described Captain Boston, who had 2 children on board named Vince and Russell. The journey was expected to last about 2 weeks. Chris and Peter, a young couple, embarked on a sailing trip with Captain Boston, a seasoned sailor who called himself a pirate of the Caribbean. Chris and Peter were experienced in extreme adventures, and the trip should have been trouble-free. After a while, Peter and Chris' parents became worried because they no longer received any updates about their children. The trip seemed like an exciting opportunity, as Captain Boston's ship, though small, offered a chance to explore the sea and new destinations. Peter and Chris spent their days fishing, relaxing on beaches, and exploring different cities and forests. Peter and Chris's plan was to enjoy their time on the ship and then visit more countries on their own after Captain Boston dropped them off. However, Chris wrote in one of his letters that Captain Boston was very strict, monitoring their work closely and punishing even minor errors. Captain Boston thought this was the best method to train capable sailors and young men. Boston's approach to education differed greatly from that of Chris and Peter, who were often surprised by the strict discipline he enforced. However, they believed that for 2 weeks, serious issues wouldn't arise. Later, one of Captain Boston's children recalled that, at the start of the journey, everything felt quite normal. But as the ship became cramped and minor disagreements occurred, tensions grew to the point where the adults could barely tolerate each other. The children Vince and Russell also frequently argued over minor matters, while their father, Boston, appeared to be disengaged. Chris informed his relatives that their plans had slightly changed. They now decided to land in Livingston, Guatemala, which meant they would finish their trip earlier than expected. After that, Peter planned to fly to New Orleans, while Chris intended to travel to Trinidad. Chris expressed dissatisfaction with the small yacht trip, suggesting that they were growing weary of seeing the sea every day. Additionally, the boat's limited space prevented them from maintaining distance from other passengers, causing irritation among everyone involved in the journey. However, Peter and Chris continued their journey, sailing around various islands, which made their experience more enjoyable. One morning around 11 o'clock, they landed on an island and went to visit the local lighthouse. There was a party there, complete with a barbecue and plenty of drinks, and everyone joined in the festivities. This turned out to be their last happy memory before something tragic happened. Then, Peter also wrote and sent letters to her relatives along with Chris. In her last letter, she mentioned that life on the boat wasn't always easy. Captain Boston frequently scolded his sons and had a quick temper. At that time, there were no mobile phones or fast communication methods, so it took about 2 weeks for letters to be delivered. Unfortunately, after Peter stopped receiving letters from Chris, she also stopped writing them. Peter and Chris' parents do not understand what happened to their children. The situation was complicated by bureaucracy. During this time, Guatemala was experiencing a civil war. Although Livingston was distant from the main conflict, it is still dangerous for foreigners because of the many gangs operating here, of which drug trafficking is a big problem. Due to the families of Peter and Chris were deeply worried. In Guatemala, dense jungles made it easy to get lost or to fall victim to gang attacks. It was common for individuals to disappear entirely. In such case, kidnappings were frequent, and for a foreigner, simply getting lost in the jungle usually means will die. Peter's family and Chris's family searched for any leads to find their missing children. They sent numerous letters and appeals across Central America, reaching out to city officials and medical centers, but they received no useful information. It was as if their children had vanished completely. Peter's family and Chris's family were devastated when they could not find any information about their loved ones for 6 months. They then hired a private detective in Belize, who took on the case and quickly established contact with a Catholic priest in Guatemala. The priest revealed that the bodies of a young man and a young woman of European descent had been discovered the previous summer. There were suspicions that these could be the remains of Chris and Peter. Any hope that Peter and Chris were still alive seemed to have been completely dashed. In August of the 1970s, fishermen discovered 2 bodies about 200 meters from the shore. The bodies had drowned, and their hands and feet were tied to prevent them from floating. They were also attached to engine parts, and plastic bags were found over their heads. It was clear that their deaths were violent rather than accidental, as a forensic expert identified signs of severe beatings and torture. The examination revealed that the victims were still alive when they were thrown into the water. This is a huge blow to the Peter family and the Chris family. They had suspected that the bodies belonged to their missing relatives, Peter and Chris. 6 months earlier, at the time of the discovery, the identities of the victims from the massacre were still unknown. They were ultimately buried in a standard Guatemalan grave marked with white crosses. To identify the victims, their bodies needed to be exhumed and compared with dental records from the UK. Implementing this process in Guatemala is very difficult, leading the relatives of Peter and Chris to attempt sending the remains back to the UK for examination by more experienced forensic experts. However, they encountered issues such as translation problems, bureaucratic obstacles, and indifference from local authorities. Ultimately, the victims were identified as Chris Farmer and Peter Frampton using the dental records sent to Guatemala, but the process took an excessive amount of time. Sadly, the family's struggles continued as they sought answers about who could have harmed their children. Chris and Peter were happy and friendly people, and their relatives could not fathom why they had died. Sadly, the truth behind this tragedy was only uncovered 37 years later. Detectives from both the UK and the US investigated the case, but they were unable to find any leads. In the 1980s, British police officially closed the case without notifying Chris and Peter's families. Penny, the younger sister of Chris, wrote letters to he for 4 years, sending birthday and Christmas wishes, but received no response. This situation deeply affected both families, Peter and Chris, who lost their son and daughter. They consistently reached out to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, newspapers, consulates, and police, seeking justice and updates on the investigation. Sadly, Chris's father and Peter's parents never received any answers and passed away before the case was resolved. In 2015, Chris's sister, younger Penny, decided to take charge of the investigation. She developed skills in online detective work. However, she had very little information about Chris' journey, except for the ship he has gone on at the time. Eventually, Penny located Boston, the captain of a sailing ship named Justin B., on which Chris and Peter has gone traveling before the tragic incident occurred. Penny pieced together limited information from Chris' letters. According to the letters, Chris and Peter detailed their plans to travel along the Caribbean coast with an American sailor and his 2 sons, aiming to reach Honduras. Boston, a native of Sacramento, California, was the last person to see Chris and Peter alive. In their last letters, Penny sensed tension between Chris, Peter, and Boston, leading to suspicions that Boston could be the killer. However, there was no solid evidence to support these claims. While walking her dogs, Penny suddenly had a realization about what she needed to do. She had previously created an anonymous social media account to monitor her 3 sons for safety reasons. This time, it dawned on her that she could use this account to gather evidence against Boston. She also felt it was essential to find Boston's sons, Vince and Russell, as she suspected they were involved in the murder of Chris and Peter. Penny located the accounts of both brothers, Vince, 13, and Russell, 12, at the time Chris and Peter were murdered. She confronted them, mentioning that her loved ones had died on Boston's ship and demanded answers. Russell ignored her. However, after speaking with Vince, who was more open to discussing the matter, she became convinced that the brothers Vince and Russell were themselves deeply troubled by the killings of Chris and Peter. Vince explained that their father, Boston, was a cruel alcoholic who abused them. During the trip with Chris and Peter, he got drunk and killed them both, and it felt like a scene from a horror movie. Penny encouraged Vince to go to the Sacramento police station to testify. He appreciated Penny's persistence, feeling that it was finally time to tell the truth. Following her advice in October 2015, Vince viewed the confession as a long-anticipated relief. For many years, Vince experienced nightmares about this incident. His father, Boston, was a dangerous man who committed numerous brutal crimes. However, the most terrible thing, Vince lived with this secret for nearly 4 decades, torn between his fear of his father and his desire to expose the truth. He had previously informed his grandmother and the police about the murder his father committed, but they either dismissed him or ignored his claims. Now, however, his statements had convinced the police, causing them to conduct an investigation into archived documents from 37 years ago. As a result, the police in Manchester and the United States launched an investigation. By 2016, Boston was charged with double murder. Vince reported that he witnessed the murders of Chris and Peta, and his younger brother, Russell, who was 12 years old at the time of Chris and Peta's disappearance, also provided detailed accounts of what happened. Vince described how Boston brutally beat Chris, stripped him, tied him up, and attached many heavy parts of the car that were later found on the ship. When Boston pushed Chris over the side of the ship, he was still alive, but that didn't stop Boston. Afterward, he went down to the lower deck, where screams could be heard for a long time. Later, Chris was thrown overboard, tied up and naked, and drowned in deep waters, leaving no chance for survival. In his interview, Vince shared his experiences of living under the oppressive rule of his tyrannical father, Boston. While other fathers played with their children, took them on outings, and rode bicycles, Vince's father involved him in criminal activities, such as robberies. He intended to use his children to break into homes and harm people. However, Vince and Russell refused to participate, which only led to even harsher punishments from there. Vince felt relieved that, after many years of being overlooked, people finally listened to and believed him. At the time of the online investigation, he was 50 years old. Initially, he was too afraid to discuss the murder with anyone, not even his younger brother, Russell, who also witnessed it. Their father, Boston, had threatened them, saying that if they went to the police station, he would die. He justified his actions by claiming he had no choice, otherwise, Chris and Peta can report him, so he needed to eliminate them. Boston believed that informers were the worst kind of people. He worried about what would happen if Vince and Russell ever revealed what they had seen. Who would be the next victim? The threats and intimidation Vince and Russell faced deeply affected them. They had grown up under the oppressive control of an alcoholic father, who instilled fear in them and kept them quiet. Despite this, Boston's eldest son, Vince, wanted to speak out and tried to do so as soon as he escaped from his father's grasp. Vince noted that as an adult, he repeatedly reported the incident to the police, but his pleas were ignored and even mocked. At first, Penny believed Boston's children were involved in the crime. However, she soon realized they were actually victims of a criminal who had been tormenting them for years. Vince and Russell found themselves in a desperate situation, and Peta's fate was sealed as soon as they got on the ship. Records show they were misled into boarding under the false belief that Captain Boston was offering cruises called Robinson Crusoe. At first, life on the ship was enjoyable. The young passengers loved sailing and treated each other kindly. The Captain Boston took them to beautiful, remote locations, and they thought this journey would be a memorable adventure on their small vessel. However, the ship and its Captain Boston were not what they appeared. He took Chris and Peta on this trip to escape from the law. He wanted to avoid facing charges for a rape he had committed in California, so he fled to Belize. To the criminal Boston, Chris and Peta looked like a great opportunity for easy money. From the beginning, he planned to dock at a remote harbor to rob them and steal their belongings. As the police investigated this frightening man further, Boston, they discovered that he was likely involved in multiple murders. He had long been the main suspect in the disappearance of his third wife, Mary Lou, who vanished after expressing her desire for a divorce and wanting to take their two sons, Vince and Russell, with her. Vince, the couple's son, recalled that his mother disappeared in 1968 when he was just 3 years old. The children deeply missed their mother and were forced to live with their abusive father. As Vince grew older, he came to understand the terrible nature of his father, who had killed a couple of travelers without remorse, and he began to suspect that Boston was also responsible for his mother's disappearance. Boston had a motive for Mary's murder. He wanted to avoid divorce, the division of assets, custody battles, and alimony payments. Vince and Russell's grandmother told them that Boston had shot Mary in the back, but it was unclear where she got this information, and Mary's body was never found. Ultimately, Boston's involvement in Mary's disappearance could not be proven due to lack of evidence. The brothers Vince and Russell often sought answers about their mother's, Mary, fate, but their father was reluctant to discuss it. During his childhood, whenever they brought up the subject, he would harshly punish them, which instilled a lasting fear in them about bringing up the topic. Boston's children, Vince and Russell, described their childhood as walking on a knife's edge. Boston was often drunk and could become aggressive, and when he used drugs, his behavior became erratic. This led to harsh punishments for the children. They were reprimanded for even minor missteps. For them, the boat trip was one of the most terrifying experiences of their lives, as they feared they might suffer the same fate as their mother, Mary. However, during the trip, Vince fondly recalled Chris, who had taken the time to teach the boys new things. Since their mother's disappearance, they had not encountered such kindness in a long time. Boston was different around new people. He was charming, cheerful, and the life of the party. However, this changed when he became uncomfortable with strangers and began punishing his children again. For a while, Peter and Chris stayed silent and did not get involved in parenting issues because Boston insisted that his sons needed strict discipline. One day, Boston got drunk and started to physically abuse his two sons, Vince and Russell. This behavior outraged Chris, who could no longer stay quiet. He confronted Boston and criticized him for his cruelty. At that moment, Boston, still intoxicated, attempted to hit Chris, but Chris managed to dodge, causing Boston to fall overboard. Although he was helped back onto the boat, he held a deep grudge against Chris from that point on. Atmosphere, tension, and uncertainty filled the after the incident. Boston felt compelled to take revenge because he thought Chris had insulted him. The following day, the couple Peter and Chris requested to be dropped off on shore. However, Boston attacked Chris from behind while he was distracted. He caught Chris off guard and struck him in the head with a single blow. Boston then delivered several powerful punches to Chris's chest and bound his hands and feet. Boston went down to the lower deck, where he knocked down and tied up Peter. The next day, he tortured and abused Peter and Chris, forcing Vince and Russell to take care of them. Vince and Russell were confused and didn't know what to do. They wanted to help Chris and Peter but were scared for their own safety. Peter asked Vince and Russell for assistance, but they did nothing. Despite the situation, Chris remained brave and did not cry. Days later, Boston announced Peter and Chris would be released on the shore. They were thrilled, thinking their suffering was coming to an end. Unfortunately, this turned out to be a cruel trick. After reaching deeper waters, he placed plastic bags over Peter and Chris' heads, tied them up, and then threw them overboard. It was essential to apprehend Boston, a brutal killer. Investigators discovered that he had sailed away from the coast of Guatemala on July 19th. Only his sons, Vince and Russell, were left behind. After the incident, he returned to Sacramento and sold the yacht. During this time, he contacted authorities, claiming he had dropped off Peter and Chris near Livingston. He accused them of drug trafficking and using illegal drugs during their trip, which caused problems in Guatemala. However, the family of Peter and Chris knew that them relatives didn't use drugs. Despite this, Boston disappeared and could not be found due to bureaucratic complications, leaving the case unresolved. Sadly, the case never went to trial. Boston was eventually found in a nursing home in Eureka, California, and was arrested on December 1, 2016. While awaiting a hearing, he faced several health issues. Just weeks before Penny and her mother were set to fly to the U.S. for the hearing, Boston's health rapidly declined. In April 2017, at the age of 75, Boston died in custody. An autopsy revealed heart and liver problems. Medical staff at the prison hospital reported that after Boston learned about the upcoming hearings, he refused to take his prescribed medications, which worsened his condition. The penitentiary labeled Boston as a coward who chose to end his life rather than confront the repercussions of the massacre he planned. Chris's family had hoped for justice to be served quickly, but the Supreme Court let them down. By this time, Peta's parents had passed away and they did not get to see the case solved. Eventually, Penny wrote a book about her brother, Chris, who was an extraordinary person and made a meaningful impact, even at a young age. In 2019, she traveled to Guatemala to visit the graves marked with white crosses where Peta and Chris were buried. Penny wept for her brother and for his girlfriend, who had stood by his side until the very end. This journey was difficult but helped her to confront her fears and pain. Chris's relatives continue to remember him, as he had aspirations of becoming a doctor and brought great pride to his family. His mother lived to be 99 years old and often felt it was unjust that her son was taken from her at the young age of 25. She often expressed that she would gladly trade several years of her life for him, believing he would have accomplished something extraordinary during that time. Hello, crime enthusiasts, are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Jody Jones. Luke Mitchell, born in 1988, was the younger of two children. When he was 11, his parents separated, and he stayed with his mother without moving away. The family lived in the small, middle-class town of Eat Houses, Scotland. From a young age, Luke was well-behaved. He enjoyed horseback riding, excelled in school, and had a passion for music. He entered secondary school at St. David. However, during his teenage years, particularly in high school, he began to exhibit unusual behavior. At that time, he met a girl named Jody Jones, who was almost 2 years younger than him. Jody was born in 1989 in another small town in eastern Scotland. The country is generally known for having many small towns located close to one another. Jody was the youngest of 3 children in a middle-class family. Both of her parents worked for the Royal Mail. She was calm, well-mannered, and did well in school. The school director even commented that she had a bright future due to her achievements in class and extracurricular activities. Family was very important to her, and she was a creative person who enjoyed poetry and painting. Jody was close to her eldest sister, Janine. Interestingly, all members of the Jones family had names starting with the letter J, including their parents, James and Judy. The family was decent and appeared genuinely happy until 1998, when the father began experiencing mental health issues and ended his life tragically. This was a devastating blow to the family, and the mother, Judy, had to leave her job to take care of the 3 children. The tragedy affected not only Judy but also the children, who were very worried. Eventually, Janine moved to Mayfield briefly to live with her grandmother, because everything in the house reminded her of the incident. However, after some time, she managed to cope with her problems and returned to her family. Gradually, life returned to normal. Everyone adapted to living without a father, the mother went back to work, and the community supported the family. As a teenager, Jones showed a rebellious streak. She wanted independence and began to experiment with clothes and appearance, listened to heavy rock bands popular at that time, and got herself a piercing. Her mother resisted these changes, particularly when Jody showed interest in alcohol and prohibited substances. She began experimenting with these substances at an early age. Around the time Jody met Luke, they were both 14 years old. The two met at school, became friends, started skipping classes together, and began dating in February 2003. They were deeply in love and even planned to marry. Jody wrote in her diary that her feelings for Luke were serious and profound, not just a superficial crush. At the start of her relationship, Jody didn't tell her friends or family about her boyfriend, Luke. For some reason, she kept him a secret. This hidden relationship went on for quite some time until she finally decided to share it. She confided in her older sister, Janine, revealing that she had a close relationship with Luke and felt very strong emotions for him. Janine understood the seriousness of the situation and informed their mother, Judy. Judy was of course shocked by the news, but was afraid of pushing her daughter away from her, so she decided to act very carefully. Judy wanted to meet Luke to understand him better, given Jody's deep feelings, and asked Jody to introduce them. In May 2003, Luke returned home with his girlfriend Jody to meet her family and get to know them better. However, things didn't go as planned. Judy learned from Luke that Jody was smoking and drinking with her friends, and Judy also discovered she had tried weed. This makes Judy worried about her daughter's increasingly close interactions and relationship with Luke. Even before the meeting, Judy had looked into Luke's background and learned about some of his unusual habits. Many local people had unfavorable words about him, seeing him as independent and daring, and occasionally rude, though he wasn't involved in any criminal activities. After a brief discussion, Judy was convinced that Luke was a bad influence on her daughter and that their relationship was risky. She forbade them from seeing each other and put her daughter under house arrest until June 30th, hoping this would help her focus on finishing the school year without distractions. However, Judy's plan failed. Luke and Jody continued to meet in secret. Judy found a path Jody used almost daily to sneak out and spend time with Luke. They would kiss near her home and share their frustrations about Judy's strictness. Luke and Jody was eagerly waiting for the end of house arrest to spend their summer vacation together. June 30th finally arrived, and Jody, very much looking forward to it, was thrilled that house arrest would end. She looked forward to seeing Luke and spending time with him freely. As soon as it was 5 p.m., Jody left home. She planned to meet Luke for an evening together. Judy allowed her to go but set a curfew of 8 p.m. However, she did not return home at the appointed time, and Judy couldn't reach her by phone. Worried that something was wrong, Judy began searching for her daughter. When Judy went to Luke's house, Jody was not there. Concerned, she asked Luke about her whereabouts, but he said he hadn't seen her that day. She had not shown up for their meet. This seemed unbelievable, as Jody had eagerly awaited this moment and had hurried to meet him. Judy became angry, suspecting that he was lying. Judy, distraught, did not believe him and demanded he answers, but he insisted he knew nothing. He agreed to accompany Judy to search for she. Luke's parents owned a specially trained dog, so they decided to follow the route she was supposed to have taken. Since there was only one road linking the neighboring towns where they lived, so they searched this route, but did not find she, which was strange. She continued to ignore their calls and messages. Despite this, Judy, Luke, and the dog persisted, keep searching over and over again, but still in vain. Finally, while walking the route again in the dark around 10:30 p.m., the dog picked up a scent in a wooded area and led them there. Luke followed the dog into the forest, using a flashlight. In the distance, he noticed something white on the ground near some walls. As he approached, he made a horrifying discovery. It was Jody's half-naked, disfigured body, tied up. She had been killed in a particularly brutal manner, which deeply shocked both Judy and Luke. Judy became hysterical, trying to aid her daughter, but it was too late. She showed no signs of life, and her body had already cooled. The mother couldn't accept that her daughter was gone. Luke comforted Judy's and called emergency services. Soon after, the police also arrived at the scene, and they were extremely shocked by this discovery. It was a literal bloodbath. Such violence had never occurred in this previously quiet area. Who could commit such a cruel act against a girl? The injuries of Jody resembled those of Elizabeth Short, who was murdered in 1947 in Los Angeles. The girl's body was not only cut in half, but her internal organs were removed. Additionally, on her face was a Glasgow smile, which is a knife cup that extends from one ear to the other. This case is one of the most famous yet to be solved. Due to the similarity of injuries, so the case of the murdered Jodi Jones was dubbed Black Scotland by some media outlets. This gruesome incident caused widespread panic among residents of both communities. Locals fear that a vicious maniac has appeared in the area and expect new attacks. To calm the public, police needed to urgently solve the case and incarcerate the dangerous criminal before he struck again. The specially trained dog amazed everyone by leading the search party straight to the body. The girl was found in a hidden spot, known only to her, under a tree, where her and a friend's initials were carved. Some witnesses believed this was not a coincidence but a clue. Jodi's body had numerous cuts and stab wounds, primarily on her chest, neck, and head. Her arms had many cuts, indicating she actively tried to defend herself. Her neck was so damaged she was nearly decapitated. She was also severely beaten, with her hair pulled out. The girl was raped, and she died from strangulation. Forensic experts investigated the crime scene and discovered a used condom, along with DNA samples from 3 men on Jodi's body. These samples were sent to the lab for analysis. Despite public concerns about a serial killer, the police believed the murder was personal, and Jodi was not a random victim. Naturally, suspicion fell on her boyfriend, Luke, whom she was supposed to meet. Typically, those close to the victim are involved in such cases. It was believed that Luke might have been the last person to see her. His calm demeanor and indifference to Jodi not meeting him as planned raised eyebrows. Why didn't he call or look for her? Perhaps because he already knew she was dead. Luke was considered suspicious by the police, so they decided to investigate him. Although he had no visible injuries, the numerous defensive wounds on Jodi suggested she must have left marks on him. His face and body would likely have been scratched. Jodi's mother, Judy, noted that her daughter's rebellious behavior began after meeting Luke, and she blamed him for everything, from her daughter's change in style to her daughter's murder. She claimed that Luke's negative influence had drastically changed her daughter. During that time, Jodi behaved so recklessly that she had to be put under house arrest. At school, in addition to her behavioral changes, she experimented with illegal substances. Jodi's mother, Judy, believed Luke was directly linked to these issues. Judy also argued that the dog didn't lead Luke to the body. She said he knew the location and led the dog straight to the crime scene. She opposed Luke so strongly that she asked him not to attend the funeral, partly to avoid media attention, as his presence at the service would have drawn interest from local newspapers. Rumors spread rapidly, and by the next day, the whole school knew what had happened. There were claims that Luke was involved in the brutal murder. Luke was known for being eccentric and called himself the town madman, but his oddities were never violent. Police suspect Luke is the one who killed Jodi, so they obtained a search warrant for his home to gather evidence and bring charges against him. While searching his room, detectives came across a peculiar picture in numerous bottles filled with urine. They didn't understand why he filled them and kept them at home. He did not provide any explanation for this. And this is just one of many strange things police discovered in his home during their investigation. His home was filled with satanic symbols, and he was notably obsessed with the singer Marilyn Manson. From the point of view of the investigation, all of this is not in the suspect's favor. However, could such eccentricities really indicate he was capable of a violent crime? In spite of his peculiar behavior, Luke denied any involvement in the crime. From the moment the police expressed their suspicions, he insisted that he loved Jodi and could never harm her. During his discussion with investigators, he mentioned a hair clip, and this raised suspicion as the hairpin was not seen when her body was discovered. Furthermore, his description of her clothing suggested he saw her later in the day, contradicting his claim that he hadn't seen her after school. According to him, she had different clothes and a hair clip at school, which didn't align with his story. The DNA on the used condom did not match Luke's. However, Luke's DNA was found on Jody's bra among other unidentified samples. The police did not have enough evidence to charge him, but he was still the main suspect in the murder investigation and was called in for questioning. Investigators also spoke with his parents. Local residents' opinion of him turned very negative, and teachers at the school tried to isolate him from other students out of safety concerns but were unsuccessful. After 2 months, Luke returned to his class, not wanting to study separately. Consequently, the school administration had to suspend Luke from classes for the duration of the investigation. For the next 10 months, Luke remained the sole suspect. The police focused exclusively on him and did not consider other potential suspects. Ultimately, based on circumstantial evidence, Luke, 15 years old, was arrested for the murder of 14-year-old Jody Jones. He also faced charges for possessing and carrying a knife in a school setting. One of the challenges in the investigation, besides the lack of evidence, was determining the motive for the murder. The police faced an issue because Luke was below the age of criminal responsibility. Later, it was revealed that the police committed several violations. Specifically, they were criticized for interrogating the 15-year-old without any adults present, such as his legal guardians or parents, and without a lawyer. The boy was pressured and forced to confess. During this time, law enforcement was more focused on building the case and finding evidence of Luke's guilt. They visited his home again and conducted another search of his room. His house was searched 3 times in total. Surprisingly, no blood was found in the house. However, many suspicious items were discovered and later used to accuse him of a brutal crime. Among these items, investigators confiscated a large number of Marilyn Manson CDs and copies of Manson's film Doppelhers. A particular 10-minute scene in the film, where the main character committed a brutal crime against a black dahlia, was of great interest. Many drew parallels between the film and the real tragedy, leading to the belief that Luke was simply imitating his idols. Investigators suspected that Luke might have timed the massacre to coincide with a cult or ritual inspired by his favorite rock bands. He was eventually arrested, bringing relief to the city's residents, who viewed him as a murderer, Satanist, and psychopath, posing a danger to society. His eccentricities were publicly scrutinized, although they had not harmed anyone, until Jody's murder. Rumors and sensational stories quickly spread. The case was heard in the Supreme Court of Edinburgh. However, Luke denied any involvement in Jody's death. The prosecution argued that he was guilty of killing his girlfriend Jody, pointing out that he discovered her body, even though he used a specially trained dog. Jody's mother claimed that he brought the dog himself. Additionally, a witness reported seeing a man resembling Luke in a khaki jacket with Jody near the crime scene, hugging, around the time before she passed away. However, this testimony has caused much controversy, as other witnesses reported seeing 2 men, and the witness ultimately could not positively identify Luke. At the trial, Luke's ex-girlfriend testified that he once threatened her with a knife, which frightened her greatly. However, he claimed he had an alibi, but it was unreliable. Luke's brother stated that on the day of the incident, he was alone in the house watching TV. However, their mother, Corinne, said she was at home with Luke at that time, and the brother was just in his room and mistaken. Despite this, the brother insisted he was alone, watching adult films, which he only did when no one else was home. Eventually, Corinne admitted she had lied, and Luke was indeed not at home. They faced consequences for this, and she was even held accountable. So, where was Luke? He never revealed his whereabouts, and it was impossible to track his phone. The prosecution presented a reconstruction of the events. According to the prosecutor, Luke and Jody met near a tree with their initials a little after 5 p.m. About 50 minutes later, he was seen alone. The prosecution claimed that he was fascinated by the story of the Black Dahlia and had watched a film of the same name, which included a disturbing scene of a massacre. Witnesses mentioned that he occasionally smoked a pipe. Then, he allegedly contemplated acting out something he saw in the film and harmed Jodi. It was also revealed that he accused possessed a small case containing a knife, engraved with Jodi's initials and her birth and death years. The case also had a note stating that the best day of he was the one that never came, a quote from Kurt Cobain, who was his idol. While none of this directly proves a crime, but the prosecution interpreted these details as suspicious coincidences, all pointing to he. The prosecutor's office believed Jodi had been killed with a particular knife, but the knife vanished and couldn't be found for comparison. Luke couldn't explain its disappearance. Neighbors of Luke testified during the trial that on the evening of Jodi's death, Luke burned something in his backyard. The prosecution suspected that this was how he disposed of the clothes he wore during the crime. Witnesses mentioned that the fire had a strange odor. However, when police searched his house, they found nothing significant. They did confiscate a large steel barrel used for burning garbage. In total, 122 items were confiscated in connection to the case. Notably, a new khaki jacket which a witness had seen disappeared from Luke's house. The prosecutor suggested that he burned it to hide blood stains. The jacket, purchased by his mother shortly before the murder, was last seen on him that day and then mysteriously vanished, raising further suspicions. A witness, a friend of Luke, testified at the trial. He claimed to have had a strange conversation with Luke shortly before the murder. Luke allegedly said that the best way to kill someone was by cutting their throat and mentioned that Luke could imagine killing someone. That day, Luke was texting Jodi, with their last message exchange occurring between 16:35 and 16:54. After 1700 hours, Luke called the information service to ask for the exact time. This was puzzling because if he was at home, as claimed, he could have just checked his watch. The lawyers argued that there was no evidence against Luke. Besides Luke's DNA from 2 other men was found at the crime scene. But only one was identified. It belonged to a friend of Janine. The prosecution suggested that these traces were present because Jodi wore Janine's shirt. Luke's DNA was on her bras, and her DNA was on his pants, but since they were in an intimate relationship, the presence of their DNA on each other's clothes was considered irrelevant to the murder case. The defense contended that Luke was eccentric, a fact he didn't deny. Yes, he was a rude teenager interested in strange things, but none of these were direct indicators of guilt. The lawyers attempted to demonstrate that he couldn't have committed the crime against his girlfriend. The numerous stab wounds to the throat nearly detached her head from her body. Forensic experts counted about 20 wounds in the neck area alone, while Jodi fought back desperately. Luke would have certainly sustained defensive marks, yet no witnesses or police officers noticed any on him during the search. There were no scratches on his face or body. The lawyers argued that he didn't have a motive for murder. He loved his girlfriend and valued their relationship. Why would he murder her, especially on a day when all restrictions imposed by her mother were lifted? They shared a serious romantic relationship filled with tender feelings and rarely argued. It just didn't make sense. The case was highly controversial, ultimately left for the jury to decide. On January 20, 2005, the jury began their deliberation. After about 5 hours, they concluded that Luke was guilty of first-degree murder. On February 11, the verdict stated that the 16-year-old would face at least 20 years in prison before eligibility for parole. However, many still doubted his involvement, believing that 2 people were involved in the murder. This thing allowed he to file several appeals, which were denied. Luke's mother had to sell their house and buy a smaller one to afford the legal fees. She fully supports her son and believes in his innocence. In 2019, a fund was established to raise money to support a man named Luke and to file new appeals on his behalf. However, the site hosting the fund eventually blocked it because it violated the site's terms. Despite these setbacks, Luke remained determined. Since 2003, when he was first accused of killing his girlfriend, he has consistently denied involvement. He made it clear that even if he were offered release in exchange for a confession, he would not accept it because he would never harm Jodi, his girlfriend. Luke had numerous supporters who, after hearing the guilty verdict in court, distributed flyers throughout the city proclaiming his innocence. So strong was their support that they even considered storming the prison. Their aim was to highlight what they believed to be Luke's wrongful conviction. However, their approach was questionable. Such actions could potentially harm Luke's case, and they also negatively impacted the Jones family, who were unjustly blamed for the situation and even received threats. In May 2007, the controversial trial resulted in the creation of a documentary about the case, which renewed interest in Luke's case. Moreover, this film revealed numerous irregularities committed by the police in charge of the investigation. Initially, the police considered Luke innocent, although they investigated him as a suspect. However, as more was learned about him, they found unconventional and unknown aspects. Most of the townspeople had a clearly negative opinion. Amid rumors and the extraordinary behavior of the town's eccentric, the investigation ceased to consider other people as suspects. All the evidence was circumstantial. Even Jodi's wounds, initially believed to resemble movie cuts, did not match so much. In fact, it was even questioned whether Luke was really a fan of Satanism and Marilyn Manson. He just followed some unpopular trends of his teenage years. To prove his innocence, Luke agreed to take a polygraph test on April 25, 2012. He passed the test successfully. 2 months later, the mother of he also underwent the polygraph test, and experts confirmed that both passed flawlessly. The documentary explored a theory that the murder might have been committed by a student who had written an essay about the murder of a girl in the woods a few weeks before Jodi's death. A friend of this student saw him shortly after the crime and noticed scratches on his face. Luke's family believes the investigation overlooked a crucial piece of evidence: condoms containing unknown male DNA. No DNA from Luke was found. They argue that the motive for the murder was rape, with the rapist attacking she and dragging her into the woods. They feel the investigation should focus more on this angle. Additionally, they claimed that when Jodi's mother came to Luke's house, he had not yet showered, yet there was no blood on him. They argue that if he were the killer, he would have showered and changed clothes immediately to wash off any blood. Years ago, the crime scene was vandalized with red graffiti referencing Jodi's murder. The message included a different name, suggesting that another person might be the murderer. This graffiti is believed to have been painted by Luke's supporters to assert his innocence. Luke's family hired 2 private detectives who identified several suspects, with Mark Kane among them. Mark was a local drug addict who died suddenly in May 2018 at age 38. Witnesses saw him at the crime scene on the day of the murder, with a scratched face and known to carry a knife. He claimed the scratches were from falling into bushes, but no one believed him given the context of Jodi's murder. However, despite his suspicious background, all suspects, including Mark, were eventually interrogated and cleared from the list. The family of Jodi is certain that the person who killed their daughter is Luke, the one currently in prison. They have no doubt about his guilt. Meanwhile, Luke's family continues their pursuit of justice. Almost 2 decades have passed since his imprisonment, and his legal team has accused investigators of multiple violations, notably the absence of forensic analysis on several DNA samples from Jodi, particularly those related to allegations of rape. This significant oversight has cast doubt on the conviction. Luke's lawyers are determined to overturn the sentence. Now 35 years old, Luke might be eligible for parole in 2025. However, he reportedly failed a random test this year. By regulation, after this point, the opportunity for parole will be postponed for another 3 years. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Katie Passaniti. Loretta had no interest in her child, Katie. Loretta was just 15 years old when her daughter was born. Right after the birth, Loretta abandoned her daughter, and the father's identity was unknown. Consequently, Katie's grandmother took her in and cared for her. They formed a strong bond, and Katie always thought of her grandmother as her mother. When Katie turned 15, her biological mother, Loretta, re-entered her life. At that time, Loretta was 31 years old and had been living with a man named Ernest later for almost 10 years, even taking his last name. Although they were never officially married, they referred to each other as spouses. Shortly after reuniting with her mother, Katie decided to move in with her and Ernest. However, the family reunion did not go as smoothly as hoped. Their life changed significantly when she moved in. As a teenager, she began to rebel. Her mother and Ernest had trouble communicating with her. She often ran away from home, attended parties, and only called parents by their first names. The family never developed a close relationship with her. The situation changed when Katie started college. She changed from a rebellious person to a more docile person. Being very intelligent, she was accepted into several prestigious institutions. She graduated with a degree in chemistry and earned a doctorate in applied mathematics from Johns Hopkins University. While still a student, she met a young man named Anthony Passaniti, who would later become her husband. Anthony recounted that she was the first person to approach him to ask for gum, which led to their acquaintance. Their friendship soon blossomed into a romantic relationship. A year later, Katie and Anthony got married, and 2 years after that, they had a daughter. At that time, she was 27 years old. The family eventually moved to San Antonio, Texas. Here, Anthony worked as a physician assistant, and he had good career prospects in the medical field. Katie taught chemistry and mathematics at several schools, earning a good salary. She had a stable career, but she decided to leave her job to become a mother again. Family was always important to her, so she decided to adopt a little girl. During this time, Katie tries to reconnect with her mother, Loretta. Even though they rarely communicated with each other before, but now they are both trying to get closer. Loretta began visiting Katie and grandchildren frequently. By then, Loretta was already retired. Loretta and Ernest lived on a 25-acre estate in a small town called Keithville. They built a log house and a large barn for agricultural equipment. Ernest manages a small farm, which was an excellent way to earn extra money during retirement. In 2008, a major change occurred. A local mining company exploited a large gas field on the farm. To obtain the extraction permit, Ernest was paid $400,000, and overnight, made him quite rich. He invested the money in his own business. Since he already had everything he wanted, he continued managing his small company as usual. Everything seemed normal, but a new problem arose. One day, Loretta called Katie and asked her a strange question. She couldn't remember how much sugar she needed for the cake. From that moment on, her calls became increasingly strange. It seems that with age, she began to have memory problems. The same happened to Ernest. One day he went with Loretta to their daughter's house, Katie, for Thanksgiving. But halfway there, he suddenly stopped. It seemed that he became disoriented and got lost. Then, he turned the car around and went back home. After these incidents, Katie sent Loretta and Ernest to the hospital for examination. The doctors diagnosed they with the onset of dementia and Alzheimer's disease. Katie still keeps in regular contact with Loretta, calling her almost every day, as she was very worried during this time. To help with the housework, they hired Tina Van Moerkeek, who moved to the farm with her husband, Chris, and their child, living in a trailer. Tina became Loretta's personal assistant and driver, as Loretta had completely lost her ability to drive. Meanwhile, Chris helped with the housework for the Luttrell family and worked on the farm where Loretta and Ernest lived. Ernest and Loretta's health rapidly deteriorated. Their memory issues became more severe, so they need more maids to do housework. They were frequently busy dealing with various matters. Ernest became irritable, visibly losing his memory. His awareness became muddled, and he became more aggressive. He blamed the neighbor for all his troubles. Katie has talked about this many times. In April 2010, Ernest went to his house and accused his neighbors of trespassing on his property, leading to a scandal that got out of hand. Katie, who was visiting Loretta, called the police and reported that Ernest had threatened to kill his neighbor. Sheriff's deputies detained Ernest and took him to the nearest medical center, where he underwent a psychiatric evaluation and received treatment for a while. His condition was poor, and upon arrival at the medical center, he was confused and did not know why he was brought there. While Ernest was in the hospital, Katie decided to help her mother, Loretta, solve the problem. She went to the medical center and presented a power of attorney over Ernest's property, which he had supposedly signed earlier. Katie insisted that Ernest remain in a nursing home for Alzheimer's treatment, as his behavior was unpredictable and aggressive. She felt that he could be a danger to himself and to others. However, he denied having threatened his neighbor or having had a conflict. According to him, he did not understand why he was in a medical facility and demanded to be sent home. The situation was unclear. Had Ernest really signed the power of attorney and just forgotten, or is there another motive in this? However, Katie kept him in the hospital for observation for a week to determine what was wrong with him. Throughout this period, even without treatment, he remained completely clear-minded. Ultimately, Ernest was discharged from the hospital because there was no reason to keep him there any longer. Shortly before noon on July 25, 2010, Loretta called 911. She reported that her husband, Ernest, had passed away. At first, it seemed like a typical report of someone who had died of natural causes. However, there was a hint of unease in her voice. The emergency services dispatcher asked Loretta to try to give artificial respiration to Ernest. However, she replied that it would no longer help and asked the rescuers to come with the police as soon as possible. The sheriff's deputies arrived at the crime scene within minutes. Outside the house, they found Loretta. It was known that she suffered from Alzheimer's. She encountered the police and seemed more confused than upset. She obviously didn't know what to do. The officers entered the house to investigate and discovered the body of Ernest in a pool of blood. Doctors confirmed his death, caused by 5 gunshot wounds. According to Loretta, when she returned home from church, she found the body of her husband Ernest lying in a pool of blood. She did not know what had happened to him. Her statement was confirmed by other parishioners. Indeed, she had been at church. Reinforcements were called to the scene. When the forensic experts arrived, they immediately began examining the crime scene and collecting evidence. They noticed that some valuables were missing from the house, including Ernest's car. Near the place where the car had been stolen, they found unusual boot prints with a unique design. Tina, the housekeeper, and Chris lived on Ernest's farm. They claimed they were not at the house during the murder and provided a store receipt as proof of their whereabouts, which confirmed their alibi. Meanwhile, detectives reached out to Loretta's closest relatives. They later learned she had a daughter, Katie, who lived in San Antonio, Texas. Upon hearing the tragic news, Katie traveled to support her. Investigators are currently having difficulty clarifying the incident. What happened at the farm that day? At the scene, police confirmed that Ernest had died tragically. It certainly wasn't him who ended his life, as there was no weapon nearby. Someone had killed he, and the gun was hidden by the killer. Finding the gun became a priority for the investigation because it could offer important clues. Ernest was shot at point-blank range, including in the head, leaving no chance of survival. He was found lying in a pool of his own blood, and the gun cabinet next to the room had been opened and emptied the ammo. Additionally, Ernest's pickup truck and several valuable items were missing. The truck was easy to locate because it had distinctive features, including a homemade fuel tank. Ernest used this tank to refuel his agricultural equipment. It had a large capacity, designed to supply equipment for 2 days. Thanks to these unique features, the truck was quickly found. Eric Crane was well acquainted with the police officer because he abused illegal substances. He had a rich criminal history, mainly due to his addiction and drunk driving. All his life, Eric was in and out of prison for short periods of time. He was found just 2 days after the murder. He was immediately arrested in the car and taken to the police station for official questioning. However, he began to categorically deny his involvement in the incident. He claimed that he was at work at the time, but his alibi was not confirmed by his colleagues. Besides, he also could not explain how he ended up driving Ernest's pickup truck. His boots had a unique pattern on the sole, resembles shoe prints found at the crime scene. However, at first they could not get him to confess. Eric was kept in custody during the investigation because it seemed he was pretending and not telling the truth. On the day he was arrested, a local TV crew found out and went to the auto repair shop where he worked. They interviewed his manager and colleagues, who revealed that he was absent from work at the time of the murder. Surprisingly, while they were there, the shop manager received a call from Eric, who was calling from prison. Eric informed his employer that he was in trouble and couldn't come to work. He also asked his boss to lie to the police, saying he was at work at the time. His boss then asked if he had really killed Ernest. Then, he shared a shocking story. He admitted to pulling the trigger and shooting Ernest, but claimed he was persuaded to do so by Tina, an employee who was also Loretta's driver. It turned out that Tina and Eric were lovers, and she had asked him to help with the crime. He claims that Loretta is the one behind it all. Eric claimed that Loretta lied and went to church during the crime to create a false alibi. She waited there until Ernest was killed. Afterward, Eric called Tina from prison to discuss details of the crime. A few hours later, a recording of this conversation reached the police station. Investigators needed to verify if Eric was truthful, if Tina and Loretta were involved in the murder. On July 28, Tina was brought in as a suspect. She denied any involvement and claimed ignorance of the incident, but her motives remained very suspicious. Ernest had always been very kind to Tina's, providing housing for her family and giving her a job with a stable income. In her situation, it would be wise to maintain this relationship for as long as possible. Why would she kill her benefactor? It seemed illogical. However, detectives suspected she was lying. To confirm, they searched her belongings and found a bank card belonging to Ernest in her purse. Checking the database, the police discovered that months before the murder, Ernest and Loretta had filed a complaint against Tina for stealing money. Eventually, they decided to forgive her without prosecution. Tina confesses that she continues to steal Ernest's money. Her husband, Chris, revealed that the night before the crime, she did not stay at home because they had a fight and she went to a hotel. It turned out that Tina had spent the night there with Eric, planning the attack on Ernest. After several hours of interrogation, she confessed that Eric murdered Ernest, but she claimed that Loretta was the mastermind. Loretta had approached Tina, saying that Ernest should die. Initially, she refused, but Loretta coerced her into participating. The motive for the crime was financial. Shortly before his death, Ernest had promised to pay off his granddaughter's tuition debts, i.e. Katie's daughter. The granddaughter was at risk of being expelled over a $50 shortfall, and Katie was struggling financially. However, when it came time to fulfill his promise, Ernest refused to pay the $50. Loretta was so angry that he was so stingy that she thought he deserved to die. Afterwards, Loretta asked Tina and Eric for help, promising to pay $11,000. The crime was meant to look like a robbery, so Loretta allowed Eric to take Ernest's gun and personal belongings. Consequently, the gun and several valuables were missing from the house. Eric stole the murder weapon from their home and then disposed of it. Of course, Tina and Eric's testimony was not enough to arrest Loretta. Before arresting Loretta, Tina was asked to call her. Her task was to talk to Loretta and try to get Loretta's to confess. She agreed because she wanted to make a deal with the prosecution to reduce her sentence. She also needed to testify against Eric and Loretta. Then, she phoned Loretta, the police recorded and listened to the call. According to the plan, she said that Eric would be released on bail in an hour. So, she needed $1,000 to cover his bail costs. Loretta agreed to pay and asked for more time to get the money. This provides evidence of Loretta's relationship with Tina and Eric, but could not obtain a confession to the murder. Ernest's funeral was held on July 29th. After the ceremony, Loretta was arrested as she left the cemetery. She was accused of hiring Eric to kill her husband, Ernest, and taken to the police station for questioning. Despite the accusations, she denied any involvement. The police pressured her, claiming she attended church that day, knowing Ernest would be killed. They alleged that she had orchestrated the crime. However, she remained firm, stating she attends church every Sunday. She also acted confused, repeatedly asking what she was guilty of. There is no concrete evidence against her, other than a phone call. It doesn't prove much. Loretta repeatedly claimed that she was always in church during the time of the crime. She mentioned her Alzheimer's disease and called the idea of her killing her husband absurd. She suggested that Tina, who had previously stolen money, may be involved in Ernest's murder. However, she denied any involvement herself. Her daughter, Katie, supported her claims and often shared this perspective with journalists. Even Ernest's family believed Loretta was not involved, pointing to her harmonious relationship with Ernest over the years. However, they later informed the police that they suspected Katie and insisted Katie should be more thoroughly investigated. It seems money is the motive. Ernest's farm was valued at around $1.5 million. Upon his death, the farm would pass to Loretta, and after her death, it will be passed on to Katie. Therefore, Katie focuses more on Ernest's assets. Because of this, Ernest's relatives decided to take the case to court. Nonetheless, Katie had a copy of Ernest's will, which allocated the property to Katie and her daughters, leaving the entire Ernest's family out of the inheritance. However, the dates in the will have many suspicious points. It was signed just 3 weeks before Ernest's death. His relatives believed it was either forged or that he was coerced into signing it while unaware of his actions. Consequently, they decided to contest the will in August 2010. By then, the investigation into Ernest's murder was nearly complete. There were 3 suspects: Loretta, believed to be the mastermind, Tina, an accomplice, and Eric, the executor of the plan. However, detectives suspected a 4th person might be involved. This was Katie, who had the strongest motive and stood to gain the most from the tragedy. Ernest's family insists that he will not pass on his inheritance to Loretta's stepdaughter, Katie. Ernest's family is certain that he wouldn't leave his inheritance to Loretta's stepdaughter, Katie. Ernest was known for being very frugal, even stingy. He wouldn't spend money carelessly or leave his family without an inheritance. Besides, he never had a close relationship with Katie, so there was no way he would leave everything to her. While the prosecution was preparing to try Loretta, Tina, and Eric, Ernest's family filed a lawsuit claiming inheritance rights. By then, the battle over the inheritance had been ongoing for several months. As police looked into the details of the incident, they began to suspect foul play. The main goal is to prove that Katie's copy of the inheritance will is a forgery. The copy of the will bears the highly suspicious signature of a notary named Penny Penner. On October 19th, the police came to see Penny, the notary. She initially claimed that she had signed the documents on July 1st, nearly a month before Ernest's death. She stated that she signed them at home, in the presence of several witnesses, including Loretta. However, she later confessed that the will was indeed forged, as she signed it after Ernest's death. When pressured, she revealed that Katie had come to her after Ernest was murdered. According to Penny, Katie explained that Ernest had died suddenly without having time to properly draft the will and that he had no living relatives to claim the inheritance. Katie was concerned that her mother, Loretta, who suffers from Alzheimer's disease, will have difficulty registering property, resulting in the property belonging to the state. The notary Penny feeling sympathy for Katie. She did not investigate the true circumstances and decided to help her. However, facing criminal charges, she chose to disclose the truth to the investigators. To avoid legal issues, she agreed to assist the detective by making several phone calls to Katie. Her task was to get Katie to confess to forging the documents. Following the plan, she called Katie, claiming she had problems with the police and needed details of the incident to draft a new document to distract the investigation. Katie answered several questions, which led to her conviction for involvement in the forgery of the will. The police had enough evidence to search Katie's house in San Antonio. They came to search for documents related to her forging of the will. When the officers entered, Katie reached for her purse. Fearing she might have a weapon, they handcuffed her. However, the purse contained no gun, only a letter with instructions for creating a fake, which she intended to destroy. In the house, they discovered boxes of documents, including copies of power of attorney for the house and notes regarding Ernest's health. It appeared she had been monitoring him for a long time, possibly waiting for the right moment to act. The police hoped to find evidence that she was involved in Ernest's murder, but they found nothing. Investigators suspected she had planned the murder with Loretta, but lacked direct evidence. Ultimately, they had to release Katie and remove her handcuffs. However, they did not give up. Instead, they decided to change their approach. After visiting Katie's house, the investigators decided to change their approach. Meanwhile, Loretta had been in jail for a long time without bail. Her Alzheimer's disease was worsening, and she was declared incompetent to stand trial due to her health. Consequently, she was sent to a psychiatric hospital for criminals indefinitely. During this time, she confessed, but her confession was not considered significant because of her condition. At the trial, the prosecution doubted that Loretta could have planned the crime alone. It seemed clear that she had assistance, probably from her daughter, Katie. After that, investigators focused on Eric Crane. In June 2011, he pleaded guilty to the crime in exchange for life sentences without the possibility of parole, thus avoiding the death penalty. As part of the deal, Eric was required to testify against everyone involved in the crime. Then, the detectives pressured Tina by threatening that they would find a way to get her the death penalty. This pressure was enough to make her confess. She pleaded guilty and agreed to testify against the other conspirators. Her interrogation was recorded on video, exposing criminal activities. Tina revealed that Loretta planned the crime and convinced her to kill Ernest. Katie was also aware of the plan and conspired with Loretta. In return, Loretta promised Tina that she and her family could live in Ernest's house indefinitely. More than a year had passed since Ernest's murder, and finally, the investigation had gathered all the necessary evidence. On March 2, 2012, the police returned to San Antonio and went to Katie's house. They forced their way in, breaking down the door. Katie's husband watched as she was handcuffed and taken away. On April 25, 2013, Katie appeared in court. She accused of committing murder in July 2010. She faced the possibility of life imprisonment without parole. The prosecution argued that her sole motive was to take over Ernest's farm. At first, she intended to put him in a nursing home to take over the house. She planned to fabricate a story about a scandal with the neighbors, then trick him into signing the power of attorney. When this plan failed, she allegedly turned to a more violent alternative. By this time, Loretta's Alzheimer's disease had progressed, but Ernest remained in good health. Katie had always had a poor relationship with him, and it was clear that he would deny her an inheritance if her mother, Loretta, died first. This gave her a motive to eliminate him, with one theory suggesting the murder was staged to look like a failed robbery. At trial, Tina claimed that she was forced to participate in the case without any other choice. She stated that Katie pressured and threatened her, trying to persuade her by promising payment. However, Tina's testimony was not convincing to the prosecutor's office. The prosecution's other key witness was Eric. Contrary to expectations, Eric testified that discussions about the murder plan only involved Tina. He claimed he never discussed it with Katie or Loretta, but suspected Loretta's involvement. Later, he added that if Katie had been involved, he would have known, but he was hearing about her involvement for the first time. The defense presented arguments to prove Katie's innocence by focusing on document forgery. According to the lawyer, Katie had indeed used a notary's services to prevent her mother from receiving an inheritance, but this has nothing to do with the murder. Loretta did not attend the hearings due to health issues. The prosecution played a recording of Loretta's testimony where she admitted involvement in the murder, but she didn't mention anything about Katie. On May 14, 2013, after just an hour and a half of deliberation, the jury reached a verdict. Katie Passaniti was convicted of conspiracy to commit murder and forging multiple documents. She received a life sentence without parole. As they left the courtroom, Ernest's family thanked each juror for their decision. They succeeded in contesting the will and inherited Ernest's entire estate. Despite this, Katie continued to assert her innocence, visibly shocked and fearful after the verdict. Tina, who cooperated with the prosecution, avoided the death penalty but was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Loretta continued her treatment until her death and never appeared in court.